Okay, we're going to record it, and we'll open. It is 7:01 p.m. Welcome, everyone, to the Harwich Board of Appeals hearing. I've got to read this statement into the record here. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GL Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Town of Harwich Board of Appeals on April 9, 2020 at 7:01 p.m. is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance members be permitted.
There we go.
Okay, somebody needs there.
David, you might want to mute everybody.
Everybody, go on mute, please, because we're picking up all kinds of background noise there. The Bowdens. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so no in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided in this order. And the remote access instructions, I guess I'm supposed to read them too. They were posted on our agenda. We have 21 people on, so I guess a lot of people did pick them up. We have the computer information. You can go onto the agenda, which is posted on the Board of Appeals webpage on the town website. You can also dial in to your phone. I'm not going to repeat read the computer login. It's fairly complicated. But the phone dial in, the number is 571-317-3122. It will also ask for an access code, which is 90344-269. And we're going to ask if, actually speaking, if you could put your microphone on mute. The other thing we need is if we start getting feedback, that means you're on phone, but your computer audio is also on. You can either computer audio or phone audio both at the same time. It just gives us tremendous feedback. Okay, we will go through the cases one at a time, and I don't know who all is here, but I will ask for public comment when we get to that point, and we'll have one person speak at a time to try to not devolve into chaos here. It's difficult because I cannot see everybody that's here. Some people are only on by phone, so they're identified by, at least on my end, caller 1, caller 6, whatever. So let me see what else I have to do. Okay, when you're called upon to speak, you're supposed to state your name, address, and the reason for your participation, such as attorney for the applicant, builder, applicant, neighbor. If you're a neighbor, if you could give us your address, that would be very helpful. And you should do this both at the beginning and then again at the end of your statement. Okay, I'm going to ask the members of the board to identify themselves. Dave Ryer. Chris?
Kathleen Muller.
Jim Hilliard. Mike Foley.
Chris Murphy.
James Armstrong.
Chris Murphy, I think that's all of us.
Sheila Delaney, secretary.
So, Okay, Mr. Hilliard, if you could call our first case, please.
Okay. Case number 2020-03, continued from 1/26/20. Andrew Hall, successor trustee of the Emulos Hall Realty Trust, through his agent, attorney Andrew Singer, has applied for a variance to redevelop a previously disturbed and commercially used portion of property located in 2 zoning districts in connection with a seasonal miniature golf course. The application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325-52, in table 1, use regulations as set forth in Mass General Laws, chapter 48, section 10. Property is located at 346 Route 28 and 0 Sisson Road, map 21, parcels N2-0, N1-0, in the CH-1 and RM zoning districts.
Okay, on this case, we're going to have voting me, Ms. Muller, Mr. Hilliard, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Armstrong are 5
Mr.
regular.
Chairman, before you begin, if I could, this is Andrew Singer. We actually opened the case on January 29th, and Mr. Hilliard was not sitting, but Mr. Donahue was. And I believe we need to stay. It was you, Ms. Muller, Mr. Donahue, Mr. Armstrong, and Mr. Capoli.
Well, Mr. Hilliard was there. The reason he did not, was not designated as a voting member was because we knew the case was going to be continued to the February meeting, which then wasn't held, and he was going to be out of town then. But he did sit for the hearing and heard the presentation of evidence.
Oh, yes, he was. He was there. Okay. All right. Could you, I apologize, and could you, if Mr. Hilliard is sitting, who was not going to be voting then?
Okay, who would not be voting would be our 3 alternates, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Capoli, and Mr. Sullivan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but I have to make a statement before you go ahead, Attorney Singer. Since the January hearing, I've learned that the coordinator of the Meals on Wheels program over at the Harwich Community Center lives in the Beach Plum condominiums up above the proposed site. And, you know, I deliver meals on Thursday, so I do know the lady, but this would not prevent me from rendering a fair and objective decision on the case. We're not socially friendly. We see each other at Meals on Wheels, and that's it. So
That is fine by the applicant.
okay. Now, we had extensive presentation the last time, so I'd like not to repeat everything. If you could maybe give us a summary and tell us anything new that you really didn't address in the January hearing.
No, I appreciate that. Again, this is Andrew Singer, attorney for the applicant. With us on the screen, you can see is Dan Croto, the project engineer. Steve Gapoyan is one of the project applicants. On phone are Suave Yosef, who is another one of the applicants, and Shannon Goheen, who is the landscape architect. What we wanted to do tonight, you're correct. We started late on January 29th, as you know. We went through our presentation quickly. I wanted to just go over, in part, the project benefits list that I submitted as a supplemental submission. And then Ms. Goheen is going to go over the landscape plan, which we didn't have a chance to do. And then the rest of us are all here for additional questions that the board might have. What I'd like to ask the board, I understand that we can't do the screen share tonight. You have this aerial photograph. You should all have a copy of it. If that is one that you are looking at, I think it's very helpful as we are continuing the conversation. That's the one, Mr. Ryer, that you have there.
Yeah, I believe we will have a hard copy of that, fortunately.
Yes, you do. what I just wanted to impress upon the board is that the longtime owners of this property and the applicant have undertaken a very deliberate process. They wanted to know what they felt would be the best use for the land in the area. This is a longtime owner. They've owned the property for many, many decades, and this is a longtime local applicant. So we're dealing with local people, and they did not want, particularly the owner, a redevelopment of the site for both the antique store, the go-kart use, and the commercial industrial use in the back. They didn't want that to all be redeveloped as a big box store. There have been many requests over the years, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to, they feel that this property is steeped in Cape Cod tradition, and they want to continue that tradition. They want to maintain the low-key aspect of the property. They want to further develop this with a family destination that's already on the site. You have the go-karts on the site. You have other nearby recreational activities. This is a perfect part of Harwichport and a perfect part of this property for a mini golf use. And they truly feel, and this is both the applicant and the owner, that this will be the quietest, least traffic generating, most vegetated, and most environmentally protective to the site. And in fact, it's going to be closed, as you know, from what we said, 7 months of the year. It's only going to be open May to September, and it's only going to be open on the weekends in May and September. So in a normal year, it would only be open every day during the more traditional height of the season. If you look at that aerial that we submitted, the yellow line that is on that aerial is the commercial line. And so everything that is between that line and Sisson Road is in the commercial zone, and it's part of what the planning board is reviewing under its site plan review and use review authority. If you look to the right of that yellow line, that's the residential zone. And you can clearly see on the underlay where it has been stripped and denuded and used. And you can see the portion of the property that the applicant is proposing to redevelop as part of the miniature golf course. In fact, they're proposing a 14,000 square foot reduction in the use of the residential zone from what is existing today. But we're going, and as I mentioned, we're going to the planning board for site plan review, looking at the design. The applicants want to work with the town. The reason we're here before you is we have a very critical first step. And that first step is this permission, if you grant it, to reuse a smaller portion of the residential zone for the redevelopment. And so the variance request is very important so that we can continue on with the planning board. We have tried on numerous occasions, both in writing and over the phone, to engage with the neighbors, the residential neighbors to the back and side of the property. We remain committed to wanting to meet with them. We truly appreciate the opportunity to continue this conversation with you tonight. The applicant and the owner, as I said, want to work with everybody, including you and the neighbors and the town, to design something here and to permit something that they feel will be in the best interest of everybody and will not be detrimental. Now, we know that change is a challenge. Change is unnerving. And again, we have a local applicant and a local owner who want to do what they feel is right by everybody. They sincerely believe that this is the best use of the land. Miniature golf is not a loud endeavor. It's not like a restaurant with outdoor entertainment. I submit that the ambient car noise on Sisson Road and Route 28 and the go-kart use that's been there for many, many decades are themselves much louder than the miniature golf course will be. And so I ask you to consider that as you are hearing the testimony, asking questions, discussing with the neighbors. Consider what we're asking to do, which is a seasonal use, as I said, closed 7 months of the year. The environmental benefits of keeping the golf course partially in the residential zone are significant. And the Conservation Commission has voted to approve the layout that you have on the aerial and on the plans for that very reason. It puts the more active use partially in the commercial zone and partially in the residential zone, because it gets it out of the flood zone and is protective of the environment. Lighting is going to be fully compliant with town requirements. All of the dimensional requirements of the zoning bylaw will be met. The relief we're asking from you is the use variance only, and it is to, as I said, reuse a smaller portion of the residential zone. And if you look at that aerial, you can see the buffers very, very clearly. With that, I'm going to ask Ms. Goheen to go over the landscape plan, and I know you have a hard copy of that too in your file. It has, it's 11 by 17, and it has blue. The landscaped area outside the golf course is labeled in blue. It's a portion of the site, and it is called Landscape Design Plan. And with that, Mr. Chairman, and Shannon, if you are there, if I could ask you to run through the landscape plan, please. I had thought she was on. Shannon, are you there?
I cannot tell because a lot of people are still identified by.
She might be on mute.
Well, they're not identified. There are 26 people on, but they're not on my list, most of them.
No, her name is not there. If she is not there, I am happy to go through the landscape plan. I am certainly not a landscape architect, but Mr. Osef, who I see is now with us, he is actually, I can start it, but he is a landscaper himself, and I can just give you the highlights, and he could give you much more of the detail. What the main improvements from the landscape plan are that the area, the 14,000 square feet plus of the residential zone that is currently denuded, are going to be revegetated with a mix of, as you can see on the plan, a very heavy mix of grasses, trees, and shrubs and plantings. This is going to also have the benefit of improving wildlife habitat. This is a question that had come up at this time. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, it won't be too long. If I could ask Mr. Osef, if he, I know he's muted now, but if he unmutes, if he could go through the landscape plan a bit more with you, then we can turn it over for questions.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Actually, Shannon is trying to unmute her microphone. I guess she's having a hard time unmuting it. Can everyone hear me, by the way?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, why don't we just give her one more minute? Oh, actually, a few seconds. Let's see if she's going to be able to do it. Yes.
Can I be heard?
Shannon?
Judith Underwood, you're muted. Is that who you wanted to speak, Attorney Singer?
No, Shannon Goheen. No, her name is not here, but Swami, okay. Did she say she is heard her? Shannon, are you here?
I can't unmute.
Oh, we can hear you.
I could hear you. Can the board members hear her?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear her.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I apologize, everybody. Okay, if you can hear me, then I'm going to read a bit of my perspective, and then I'm going to do the plan for you, okay? Okay. I've been designing since 1988 here on Cape Cod, and that is significant because I've been involved in a lot of projects with landscapers, developers, various Cape towns and town departments, and homeowners. I've drawn landscape plans for developments across Cape Cod, from large industrial parks to shopping centers to hotels to town building landscapes to individual homes. I've seen my designs help these people get through various town boards and have received accolades for my work. And then, unless I am directly involved in the installation of the project, what actually happens? It goes in however the installer wants it to go in, whatever the installer wants to use, whatever the owner of the project decides is quick, easy, and cheap. In other words, whatever the bare minimum is, that's the way the project goes. The bare minimum here on this project was to use native plants up to 100 feet from the area declared prone to flooding. All I had to do was satisfy the requirements of the Conservation Commission by using native plants up to 100 feet from the wetland area, and that being at the intersection of Harold and Sisson. That was our minimum. So what did I do? I built on the best thing that this property had going for it and kept going. That is, it already has a large buffer of trees and shrubs that separate it from its neighbors. So I built on that and made it better. I built on the bare minimum of adding native plants in the buffer zone, and I kept it going. Essentially, I added rows of native evergreen trees and native deciduous shrubs so that the screen is complete. I added more natives beyond the 100-foot zone, and I kept the theme going so that there would be open space for wild creatures and screening and beauty. And the thing is, unless you're brand new to Cape Cod, you know that any piece of land that is commercially viable is going to be developed. It's never if, it's only when. Cape Cod has had a chance to really decide, Cape Cod had its chance to decide how it would handle development back in the early 90s. And against my wishes, it chose development. So the question becomes, how does one handle this? How do I, if I'm involved in the decision-making of development of land, how do I make it better? And the fact is, given all my years of watching land get developed, watching projects go and counter to how I designed them, watching people tear down everything that says Cape Cod, I am skeptical. I have my doubts about the sincerity of developers. Of course I would. I've seen it so many times. But this property that we are discussing is in fact going to get developed. There is no amount of magical thinking, imagining that it can stay as it is, that will save it. That's just not going to happen. But there is a huge silver lining here, a huge one. There is the current owner of the property who wants to do the best that she can for Harwich Port, for her longtime neighbors. And there are the two mini-ghost partners who want to do it the best they can for Harwich Port, for their future neighbors. And they've got me advocating for the land. And they agree with me. That's why we are a team. We all want that. We've worked together numerous times before, and I know that their word is good. They'll do what they say they'll do, and this is not an exercise in futility. So what you have here is a triumvirate of advocates for improving the land beyond what it is now, for the neighbors, for the good of the environment, for the birds, the bees, the critters who depend on open space. And it's easy to call change bad, but some change is good because it turns out better for everyone and everything. Now there are options and other business, a home, a mown, fertilized, bright green grass, token trees, fences to keep animals out, but we're not going to do that. And your choice is, will you take what is good and welcome it, or will you reject change, only to be sitting here in the near future dealing with a proposal far worse? So that's my motivation for what I did here. And now I refer you to the drawing that you have in front of you. I can't see the screen. I'm only operating from my phone, but I know that you've got the design. So let me just quickly go over that for you. And you'll see the little north arrow in the bottom. So east is at the top of the page. And you can see that the east side and the south side, that's all native. All of it is native. Even the grass I have up there, that is native too. The trees that I've got up there and the shrubs are mixed deciduous and evergreen. We're talking about pines. We're talking about cedars. As far as the shrub goes, we're talking about viburnum, bayberry, a little plant called sweet fern, something called summer sweet. We have some evergreen shrubs, inkberry, and some native grasses called switchgrass. That is a whole collection of items that are not only lovely to humans, but it's full of benefit for critters, birds, etc. It also changes with the seasons. Even the trees in the parking lot are native flowering and shade trees. And any existing trees along the road, we intend to leave them there unless they are profoundly damaged. So we want to work with what the land already has. And you can see from, I think that you might have the 3D image. If you don't, there is a very large buffer to the east of this property between the proposed area of development and the condos on the hill. That is going to be absolutely untouched. That is a wonderful bonus to this property. And so we're going to leave that. We're going to augment it with native stuff, keep what's good, and make it better. I believe in this project. I trust my team members to develop the property with sensitivity, and I hope that you agree with me that this is a chance to have a strong environmental improvement to the sand pit that has been here for as long as I can remember. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask, this is Andrew, before we turn to, can you all see the plan that is on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We welcome any and all questions.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Hilliard, I have a question.
Okay, hold on a second.
Okay.
First off, if we can put the plan off so we can get everybody back on there, the faces, please.
Okay. Suave, if you could turn off the screen share, please.
Working on it.
Thank you. New technology for all of us.
Okay, thank you. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the board ask questions first, and after that, we will then invite the public to have questions or comments. So we'll start with Ms. Muller. Where is she on my screen here? There she is.
Yep.
Kathy?
Yes, I'd like to know if the landscape plan is integral to the application, if it's a commitment on the part of the would-be developer, and if the buffer between the sand pit and the homes on Harold Street would be retained as a matter of law or obligation.
To answer your question, this is Andrew Singer. To answer your question, yes, we are proposing the landscape plan as a commitment. We are also proposing the retention of the vegetated buffer that you see on all of the aerials and plans as part of what we're proposing to you. And if the board sees fit to grant that as part of the condition of granting the relief requested, that would be more than acceptable.
And my second question is, what basis do you have for requesting a variance?
Through the chair, this was in our, and I'm happy to go over it. We'd also submitted this in writing in my revised summary of reasoning that we submitted to you as part of the supplemental submission. What we are looking at from the variance criteria is that the hardship is based on the soil conditions and topography of the property, specifically the floodplain status, as you can see on all the plans, that are within the front half of the property. Most of the commercial zone is in, or a good part of the commercial zone is in the floodplain area. This is the part of town, as everyone knows, where there was the accident a year or so ago, where there was an environmental spill out on the road. This, by keeping this redevelopment further out of that floodplain, it will promote the second and third criteria of the variance law, that it's not a detriment to the public good and it's not in derogation. And we believe the hardship is specifically the fact that the land has been developed in the status that it is for many, many decades, and given the rising slope of the land and the water conditions, soil conditions of the floodplain, that is a hardship that allows the board to entertain a reduction in use, but still a use of part of the residential zone for the redevelopment.
And is there anything about the conditions of that piece of property that would prevent the owner, for instance, from developing multifamily residential there?
The property could be availed of a redevelopment that had a year-round, more active use in the commercial zone and high-density residential in the rear, which, Ms. Muller, what you were referring to. Yes, you could do, with permits, a more intense, more year-round, more noisy, more land-clearing project. That is exactly what we're trying to avoid. And that, in my opinion, is one of the most significant reasons for the variance request, is that if you can do something with a piece of land that would be more disruptive, cut down all the buffer. You don't have to retain the buffer. There's nothing in town law that says you have to retain that buffer. If that wasn't there, if you did a more intense development in the commercial zone, which is allowed by right in many instances, we feel that the hardship is to the owner, to the applicant, and to the town, because then you'd be having a more intense development than is beneficial for the environment, is beneficial for wildlife, is beneficial for neighbors, or is beneficial for the applicant and the owner who want to keep a more traditional Cape Cod setting. So that is our rationale for the variance request.
I have no more questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard?
Thank you. Attorney Singer, the evergreens that you're going to be planting, do you know what is the number of those trees, and what is the height that you'll be putting them in at? If you know.
I'm going to ask Ms. Goheen to answer that, if I may, because she is the expert.
Yes, I'm here. So we will probably have at least 15 to start, and they should be 5 to 6 feet tall.
5 feet, you say?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, but what was that count? What was the count again? Did you say 50?
15,
15. And that would be toward the back that abuts the residential area?
Yes, that lines the east side of this property between the proposed developed site and all of the neighbors.
And if I might, Mr. Hilliard, this is Andrew Singer. Just to clarify, that line of trees that Shannon was referring to is not on the property line. It's at the back of the golf course, and you still have more than 100 feet of the natural growth that's there. So it's not the only buffer. It's actually the enhanced buffer beyond the trees that are being retained.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Donahue?
I'm going to pick up where Mr. Hilliard left off. The number was 15 trees.
Yes, I've expanded it, yes.
Well, much of what I have seen when I go up into the condo complex, and also traveling by where the 2 boats are located on the property, during the early spring, as we are right now, those trees are not in full growth. Those are trees that are currently the old growth trees that are up there. Would it be feasible to put in a rather fast growing tree, cypress possibly, bring it in at about 15 feet in height to begin with, and add about another 10 trees to a total of around 25, giving the springtime, when the trees in back are not completely filled in, more coverage for the tenants.
There are also feeders back here.
I'm sorry, did I just interrupt you, sir?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
There's also cedars in this plan, white cedars. So pines are not the only thing. Pines grow very fast and they're native. I was sticking to the native theme here because I know that it was important for at least some of the people in the condos that spoke to me. It was important for them to have an intact woods with creatures that they've been enjoying now. Leland cypresses are the fastest growing thing. Pines are the second fastest growing. Lelands are not native, so I did not choose them. That's why they're not in this plan.
All right, thank you. I'm just curious though, if the trees you're going to be putting in, could they be a larger growth tree as opposed to coming in with 5 footers? Could a tree come in
I
at
think
3?
that they could, particularly in certain places. We could come in with a bigger tree, yes.
All right, I'll pass on to somebody else right now. I have some other questions later on.
Mr. Armstrong. Oh, you went back on mute, Jamie. You got to unmute again.
How's that?
Okay.
Just a question in regard to hours. Obviously, it's seasonal. It would have the same. It's not the same company that would be running the go-kart. It's a separate company. Is that correct?
This is Andrew Singer. Yes, Mr. Armstrong, it's a separate company, and the hours that we had discussed at the first meeting during May and September, it would be weekends only. 7 days a week, June, July, August, and it'll be 10 to 10 when they're open, weather dependent.
Okay, and that's basically the same hours as the go-kart track, is that correct?
I am not familiar with that. Suave, do you know the answer to that?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
I would just assume that it's the same hours as the go-kart track and be open at the same time.
Yeah, pretty much the same standard time. During the season, it will be probably about 10 o'clock until 10 in the evening, shutdown. In the off season, everything is variable based on weather. Like, look at this spring. We've had tremendous amount of rain, not to mention all the other obstacles that we have in at the moment. But to answer, standard hours would be 10 to 10 during the season, and probably 10 to sunset on the shoulder seasons.
Great, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Murphy.
To the existing residentially zoned area, have you in the past looked to add residential to that, build something, look at the alternatives? Has that been actually planned out and considered, or is that just at this point a hypothetical?
This is Andrew Singer. At this point, Mr. Murphy, that is hypothetical. It is something that would be feasible with high density residential back there, but it is not something that has been planned specifically at this time.
So during the time the ownership of the property, no one's really looked at putting residential back there?
Let me clarify. I am not aware of the applicant, my client, having, they have not considered that. I cannot speak for what the owners have considered or not over the past 30 or 40 years.
Okay. I was thinking more of the owners, not the applicants, correct?
Okay, yes.
Yep.
If I can add to this, because I'm very close with the owner, and I think I could share this. The goal is not to disturb any more of what has been disturbed over the past 60 years while they have been there. As you all are aware, some of you over here that I see on this screen, I think they have been, in high school when they were going there to the go-karts. And you are aware that this business has been around for 60 years. I personally don't know any business on the Cape, especially in our town, that has been survived for 60 years, and here we have that. So the goal is to prevent from more development in this particular area. Keeping the trees, adding more to it, and just keep it as seasonal as possible. And the rest, like good 7.5 months would be just like it is right now when you drive, except that it would be improved. So at this time, the owner, at least based on the conversations that I have had in the past, probably 3 years, I've been working with her and her former husband. They're not looking to any more development.
Okay, Mr. Capoli.
No questions right now.
Okay, Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, thank you. Couple of questions. In the narrative, sir, you mentioned that one reason for the variance was that there's no access to the residential portion of the property except for the commercial zone. Is that correct?
The existing access to the residential property is through the commercial zone. The residential portion does have frontage on Harold Street. You could do it. You could do a driveway from Harold Street into the residential portion if you had a residential or some other development back there. What I was stating is that the existing development, the existing access is through the commercial zone. There was some question about, and this is something we've been discussing with the planning board, the main access on Sisson Road is to be improved. There existing access on Harold Street, we were proposing to improve it, but there was a question raised, could it actually be closed and relocated to Sisson so that you had 2 curb cuts on Sisson and no curb cut on Harold? That is something that Mr. Croto has been looking at. That's one of the things we would discuss with the planning board. But there was no access proposed into the residential from the residential zone on Harold Street.
Okay, and there won't be, correct?
Not under this plan, no. We are proposing that there would be no access into the residential zone from Harold Street directly.
Will there be any particular flow, like one access is for exit, another one egresses for coming and going, or one floor?
That is something that we had when we met with town staff, there was questions about, right now, as you know, the existing curb cut into the go-karts is pretty much wide open. And Correct. This plan shows it being controlled and narrowed with some islands and with some additional, landscaping. And we had originally been looking at the Harold Street curb cut as an exit predominantly. That is something that the planning board would be looking at. Again, the applicants are open. That's not wedded in stone. Whatever works for the police department, the town, the best, as long as there are the 2 curb cuts like there are today, that can work for the business.
All right, thank you. I just want to confirm that in your narrative, you indicate that I believe that the existing trailers that are on the property and there's a boat there, that will all be removed, and there'll be no future storage of anything that not related to the business on the site.
That is correct. If you look at the aerial, you can see all of that. In fact, the 3 storage trailers, parts of the boats and others are outside of the area of the fence for the mini golf, and that would be in the area that Ms. Goheen was discussing as being revegetated. So you are correct. All of those would be removed. There would be no more storage on the property.
Okay, thank you. Is there a requirement in the town of Harwich regarding the size of a parking space?
Yes, there is.
Dan Croto, the site engineer. A standard parking spot through the zoning tables is 9 feet wide by 20 feet long. With a 24-foot backing packing area between parallel sets of parking spots.
Okay, so that'd be 108 inches center on center width. Okay, thank you. And yes, no, that is all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Attorney Singer, have there been any attempts that you're aware of in the last 3 years to develop or market this property?
I have not been involved for the last 3 years. Mr. Osef mentioned that he's been discussing with the owners for a number of years, but I do not know what they have done as far as active marketing of the property. I do know from what I have been told that they have been approached over the years. I can't say it's within the last 3 years only, but they have been approached over the years by larger companies wanting to redevelop the entire parcel. But I think those were probably cold contacts as opposed to being marketed.
Okay, thank you. I haven't made up my mind, but if I were to vote for this, there's a number of conditions that I would like to see in any motion to approve this. First off, I really think we should not permit a curb cut or access or egress from the property either to or from Harold Street. I think when you go up, I had not gone up Harold the last time, but I have since then, and it's very windy, very narrow. Really, we do not want additional traffic coming into this site, either coming in from Harold or going out in Harold. I really think that's unacceptable. So that would be condition one. Condition two, you have to do it anyway, but just a condition that you would fully comply with the lighting requirements of Article 21 of the bylaw. You have to do that anyway. I also would want a condition that all of the water areas either be aerated or treated so that they are going to be sanitary and visually acceptable, and to prevent algae growth during the warm weather. One of the golf courses, the mini golfs down in 28, the water is blue. I don't particularly like it. It's better than the green algae. We would also need to impose that construction time limit, that there be no substantial demolition construction during any year between June 30 and Labor Day. I think we want a condition of no food and or drink sales. I think we had talked about that previously. I would like a condition of no music on site. As you know, every week during the summer, there's another noise complaint with the outside music at the restaurants. I don't think we want it on this site either. And we would want a condition that the operation would be from May to September, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., which you've already stated you're going to do, and weekends only in May and September. I would like a condition that all the existing trees in the RN zone remain. You said you're going to do that, so I would just make that a condition. I think we also need a condition that any plants and shrubs that die within 3 years of the opening, you will promptly replace. I think during the first 3 years on that site, during the hot weather, it's going to be important that you water those things, because otherwise I think they're going to die until they get established. And taking up on Mr. Donahue's, I think the trees you're going to add on the boundary on the north side and the east side, you really should have a minimum height of 12 feet. I know they grow fast, but you're proposing on the landscape plan 5 to 6 footers for the red cedars and 5 to 6 footers for the white pine. I would like to see that double. It's not a huge expense. And the last condition would be that the landscape plan, we make that a specific condition, because I do think that landscape plan is important to the development of this site. So why don't you think about that? In the meantime, let's open it up to the public. Ladies and gentlemen of the public, what I'd like you to do, because I don't know who's out there, I've got 28 people showing up that are here, but most of you don't have names. You can do it one at a time. Somebody tell me who they are and why they want to speak, either for or against this petition, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Attorney David Reed, if I may?
Yes, Attorney Reed, yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Attorney David Reed from Yarmouth. I represent the Beach Plum condominium, which has been mentioned several times as the immediately easterly abutter. Their address is 14 Harold Street, for the record. We would like to speak in opposition to this proposal. I think, given the fact that this is a second hearing and not an initial hearing, I still think your analysis ought to start with the criteria for a variance rather than whether you like or dislike the end product. The criteria for a variance are must all be satisfied, not just a few. And as you know, and have yourselves considered many times, the applicant has to demonstrate to your satisfaction that the literal enforcement of the bylaw would cause them a substantial hardship. That hardship is the result of some special circumstances related to the soil, shape, or topography of the site, that the relief could be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or the neighborhood. And lastly, that granting of the relief would not derogate from the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw at issue. So now you've already asked the question, what is the hardship? The only hardship that I've heard voiced is that they're unable to do a mini golf operation, which is their choice for what they consider to be the most desirable use for the site. But that's a choice, not a hardship. I've heard nothing in response to the questions from several members of the board to indicate why they could not reasonably be expected to develop the site for any other allowed use, including residential, which is what it's designed for. Now, what is the special circumstance on which they rely for their perceived hardship? The floodplain area, which is within the commercial section of the property predominantly. Now, a floodplain area is certainly a topographical feature, but it's not enough to have an unusual condition on your property. You have to show that that condition is what causes your hardship, your inability to do what you'd like to do. But the floodplain is not preventing them from continuing or even expanding the parking area, which presently occupies that part of the lot. And the floodplain is not what prevents them from developing the residential portion for a mini golf course. If there were no floodplain conditions, if that were dry as a bone, they still could not develop the residential part for a mini golf. So it is simply not a cause of their inability to do what they want to do. It is not the cause of a hardship. Nor is it, at least from anything they've voiced so far, a reason why they can't develop it for a legitimate and lawful use, such as residential. Now, in terms of whether or not granting the relief would be detrimental to the neighborhood, we suggested it would be, at least as compared to a residential use, which is what ought to be there by design of the town. They're proposing 2 18-hole golf courses, as you indicated, operating at prime time from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. They're proposing the addition of 41 light fixtures in the mini golf course itself, all on 14-foot poles. By my count from the plan, there are 17 double light fixtures and 7 single light fixtures within the golf courses themselves. Plus, there's an additional 9 pole lights in the parking lot area. The proposed parking would have 83 parking spaces plus 7 in reserve. The golf course areas themselves, the majority of which is within the residential zone, will have what looks to me like 11 other buildings and structures as tall as 21 feet, if I understand the plans correctly. I think the lighthouse is the tallest of the features. So we have 36 holes of golf. If just 4 people are occupying each hole with no overlap, no duplication, no people hanging around or waiting, that's 144 people who can use this at an optimum level at any one time. And what will they be doing? They'll be having fun. They'll be enjoying their vacation. They'll be laughing, singing, competing with each other, all wonderful things on your vacation, but not activities that 144 people doing is conducive to the adjoining residential neighborhood, which is what this is supposed to be. They have the right to enjoy their property during the summer seasons and during the days and evenings just as well as this property does. And it ought to be used for its intended purpose. And when they all leave, a good percentage, as presently designed, being mindful of the chair's proposal a minute ago, will be exiting out onto Harold Street, right near the intersection with Sisson Road, and that is the primary entrance and exit from this residential neighborhood. So we contend that it will be detrimental to the neighborhood, at least more detrimental than a conforming use, something residential. The landscape architect who spoke before said, if I can approximately quote her, it's not a question of whether this site is going to be developed, but when. That's true. But it's only going to be developed, absent variance relief from you, for a conforming residential use, which will be fine with the neighbors. That's what it's there for. The suggestions that a big box store has had some interest in the property or might have some interest in the property is really not a legitimate comparison, because you can't build a big box store on the commercial zone portion of this lot. They would also require variance relief to enter into the residential, the RM portion of the property. So that's really not a fair comparison, I would suggest. And the applicant in their presentation makes repeated reference to the fact that the past use of this property for stockpiling and parking of derelict vehicles is something that would be desirable to get rid of. Well, sure it is. But they're not asking you for a special permit. They're not contending that that is a legitimate, lawful, pre-existing use of this site. It's not. From anything we've been able to find, there's never been anything to legitimize or authorize the parking of those vehicles and the storage of that equipment on this site. It's a rogue and derelict use, and it shouldn't be rewarded by somehow giving the applicant a step up in getting a variance for some other use that's not supposed to be there. This is residentially zoned property. The commercial zone portion is only the area adjacent to Sisson Road and 28. This is not some insubstantial encroachment into the residential part of the lot. This is a major development of the residential portion of the lot. 2/3 approximately was the estimate from the applicant. 2/3 of the 36 holes of mini golf are going to be located in the residential land, and they shouldn't be there. This is a significant encroachment. This is a misuse of the property. There is no basis for a variance to be granted to use this land for something other than what it's supposed to be used for. And we would ask you to deny the application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Reed. Is there someone else out there in the public that would like to speak to this application?
Hi, I'm Carol. Trying to turn the camera on too. Oh, there it is. Hi, I'm Carol. I'm Carol Porter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm trying to get the screen on.
Yeah, we don't see you, but I can hear you.
All right. I can't figure out how to get the camera screen to work, but try it. Okay.
Okay. As long as we can hear you, you can make your statement.
My name is Carol Porter, and I live at 14 Harold Street. I'm in a butter, and I'm also on the board of trustees for the Beach Plum condominiums. I wanted to point out as far as the aerial view of the property goes, there was an aerial view, and I hear a lot about a buffer zone and how they're going to plant trees between the miniature golf course and Beach Plum, but a large portion of that buffer zone is not owned by the Halls. In fact, the part that gets closest to the miniature golf course isn't even owned by them, so they have no control over whether someone cuts those trees or not. So to say they're going to build a buffer zone, in the area they control, they can say that. But I am concerned about that large area of trees and whether another person could go in and cut down the trees and build something else there. And also, I just want to point out all the emails and letters that you have received. If this was a normal circumstances, there would be a group here from Beach Plum to voice their opinion. But these aren't normal circumstances, so we have to do what we can. But if you've read over all the emails and letters that you've received, nobody at this condominium association, it's densely populated. There are 84 units here that people call home, and they're all strongly opposed, as shown by those letters and emails that you've received. And there's other area too, although not direct abutters. Harbor Watch condos are also severely affected. And at another time, you know, they might have been here, or we might have been able to reach out to them and let them know, because it's one thing to read it in the Cape Cod Chronicle. It's another to see a picture of the size of this thing. When you see a picture, this thing's huge, and it's not right for the area. And I just wanted to voice my opinion that I appreciate what the zoning board does for the people of Harwich, especially during this difficult time. And I hope, you know, I know you'll act in the best interest of the town and the people living here. So I thank you. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Porter. Is there anyone else out there that would like to speak to this petition? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if we have a chance to rebut, you know, once it's the appropriate time, we would like to.
Who just said that?
That was Andrew Singer. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes, I was going to give you a chance to respond if you'd like to, Attorney Singer. I just wanted to see if anyone else had anything to say first. But yes, you're certainly happy to have you respond to those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate, you know, the comments. We did have an opportunity after the first hearing to discuss the project, show some plans to some of the residents of the Beach Plum condominium. I don't know that everybody in the condominium is against this project. Certainly there are many who have concerns. Everyone else, as far as Harbor Watch or other condominiums, this project was advertised many, many months ago. And so I don't think we can just presume that people are against it if they don't come. In response to some of Attorney Reed's comments, what I think it's important for the board to remember when you're looking at a variance request is that the state law and the town law allows variances for use. And if this entire residential zone was treed land now, if there was no pre-existing use of the property, you still have the legal right to grant the variance if you find the hardship and the other criteria are met. Now, in this case, I believe that the argument is even strengthened because the use that's on the back there has been there. Everyone's known about it. It's been there for 40, 50 plus years, and it is being removed. It's there now. It's continuing now. This is a chance to remove it, and it's a chance to remove it in a way that right now, the residential zone is approximately 96,000 square feet. At the moment, there's approximately 49,000 square feet of that area that's been stripped and denuded. This is going to not only preserve the remainder of that 96,000 square feet, but reduce what's previously disturbed by 14,000 square feet. So you'll have about 35,000 square feet of the residential zone, which will be part of the golf course, and you can see it on the aerial. But it's the part that's the furthest from any neighbors. It is the part that abuts up to the commercial zone. The comment that my client and the owner cannot control what the neighbor may do with their trees is absolutely correct. I cannot speak to that. So the applicant is proposing to you an improvement and a strengthening of the buffer along the lines that we were discussing with your questions before, to strengthen the buffer where they have it. Now, if you do look at the aerial, you can see that there is a very significant buffer out to Harold Street and to a portion of the Beach Plum condominium. So there's an angled property line, but there is a very significant 50,000+ square feet of area that's going to be natural and preserved in perpetuity. As far as a different use, you wouldn't put, a traditional big box store, for example, as Attorney Reed said, in the commercial zone. It's funky shaped. But CVS would fit, a convenience store would fit, a Dunkin' would fit. A lot of uses that will have more year-round, more light, more heavy traffic use all the time are permitted. And the board, under the court cases, is allowed to look at hardship that makes a use that might otherwise be allowed not relevant or the best for that area. I don't know if any of you were on the board. I don't believe you were, but many years ago, I was involved with a project in downtown Harwich Port next to the Cumberland Farms, where you have a commercial building up front and several residences in the back, the condominiums kind of across from Heather's Hairport. And that project obtained and was granted a variance from this board for the specific reason that the uses that you could otherwise make of an odd-shaped piece, that was an odd-shaped piece, it wasn't a wetlands issue, it was a shape issue, that justified the fact that you could do something in the residential zone was so small, justified the development that was allowed, the redevelopment that was allowed under the variance criteria. So I believe you have the authority. You have the ability to grant this variance, and for the reasons that we've said. And as far as specifics about no access onto Harold Street, or some lighting poles are too high, or preserving the buffer, those are all on the table. And those, as I've said, are things that the applicant is more than willing to continue talking with the neighbors if they're willing to, and with the planning board during its site plan review and use review. So if those are the main concerns, we're happy to keep talking about them. I think an accommodation can be made if necessary. But I do believe at the threshold issue that you do have the authority to grant the variance. And I believe there is a hardship when a use that might otherwise be allowed will actually be more intrusive, more disruptive, and more of an impact on a neighborhood than what's being proposed. Thank you.
Anyone else in the public want to speak?
Excuse me, if I may add to this, this is Swati speaking, the applicant.
Hey, hold on a second. Let's get the plan off the screen if we could, please.
Yep, I'll take it off right now. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now who is speaking there?
This is Swati, I'm the applicant.
Okay.
I just want to reply to Attorney Reed's concerns in regards to the structures, lights, those are the two key things that he got probably strike me. So he was correct in the count. However, he didn't explain. I hope he knows, but I just will share this information for everyone here. The height of the lights that are within the miniature golf are 12 feet high. The height of the lights in the parking area are 18 feet high. All the lights are dark sky, which means there is no polluting light outside of that area where they light up. In regards to the building heights, there's only one lighthouse, simulation of lighthouse. There wouldn't be light going, it's just going to be a building. This is 21 feet. The top of the lighthouse, based on the topography where it's going to be placed, would actually be below the grade of the Beach Plum condominium area. All other structures, which are total of 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, 7. All the remaining 6 buildings, or replication of fisherman's vessel, harbor, we got a water wheel here. they're all 11 to 14 feet, which they still will be below the grade at the Beach Palm condominium. So in the process of designing all of that, we didn't want anything to be outside of the landscape typical for our area. We wanted to bring, buildings and structures that are typical for the Cape. They still got to be fun and appealing, but we wanted to appear, beautifully even in the off season. As far as people coming in, having fun, 140 people at all time. Well, isn't that what the Cape is all about? Isn't that part of the economy? Isn't that what drives us? Isn't that the reason why people come to the Cape to have good time? This is providing livelihood not only for our business, but for several others. Talking about restaurants, talking about mom and pop shops, talking about hotels, talking about construction companies, service companies, everybody. We know it. This is part of our economy. This is why we're here. This is generating a lot of, taxpayers' dollars and reason for people to come in. And, we have a beautiful town. Yes, that's true. But when people come, we want to keep them in our town. The town has done a great job with the restaurants, just like a quarter mile away from where we're proposing our project. Wouldn't that be the best fit for everybody? This is another question that everybody needs to answer. At least this is my opinion. Everybody's got an opinion, and I believe we're all reasonable. I understand the concerns that our abutters have. I live here. My business is quarter mile away from there. I provide 20 families with paycheck every week. I am part of the community. I have been on the Cape for 12, 13 years right now. I understand the dynamic. And making noise about something like what we're proposing versus what could be and what should be, well, Mr. Reed, with all the respect, this is also your opinion. Only your opinion. And respectfully, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I truly believe the intention that we put into this project, the thoughtful process that we went through, we've considered the most respectful proposal for the neighborhood, for the community, for our town. With that, I'll close right now. I'm happy to answer any other questions if they come across, and if I feel like I can deliver good information. But with that, I would give the word to somebody else.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Is there anybody else? Attorney Reed?
Mr. Chairman, may I have just a moment? If there's no one else?
No one else? Okay.
This is not a case like the cases Mr. Singer references, where one is unable to use a piece of property for its intended purpose. And therefore, it's appropriate to start looking for other uses that might be just as compatible. We've got almost 2.5 acres of residential property here in the RM zone, just that portion. And I haven't heard one reason voiced tonight why it can't, logically and logistically, be used for residential uses. All the other less desirable activities, or potentially less desirable, which Mr. Singer cites, again, could only be available in the CH1 zone portion of this property, not in the RM portion. And the fact that this property is appropriately used for residential is not my opinion, it's the bylaw. That's what it's zoned for. It's not a choice that we made. It's a choice that the town made to draw the line where they did and to keep this portion residential. It is appropriate, of course, that we provide for our commercial businesses, that we provide for our tourists. We have them amenities and things to do. That's integrally a part of the Cape, and we're all extremely aware of it this year because of the predicament that we're in. But it's appropriate to use those things, to do those things for our businesses in the business zones, not in the residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Mr. Donahue? Got to unmute yourself.
I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing on this.
Could I have a second, please? How about Ms. Muller? She's muted. Second from Ms. Muller. All in favor of the 5 voting members?
Aye.
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 Aye. Mr. Hilliard, is he there?
I'm here.
Okay. Aye. Do we have a unanimous vote to close the public hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, public hearing is closed. Board members, let's discuss it. I have to say, just speaking for myself, I find Attorney Reed's arguments very persuasive. I'm having great difficulty looking at it and seeing why the shape or topography of the lot justifies a variance when we do have buildable land there, a fair amount of it, to put some kind of a housing development. For whatever reason, the town drew the line where it is, and of course that's true throughout all of the districts that generally front a road, 28, or in this case, 39. So I don't know, I'm having trouble seeing the legal justification for a variance. That's my 2 cents. Kathy?
I think my questions and my notes from the original hearing indicated I have the same question, and I keep going back to MGL, to the definition of what constitutes a hardship. I don't see it here. And also I see a great irony in the fact that the town is currently encouraging the development of affordable with a small a housing. And here we have a residential parcel that we're considering allowing to be engulfed by a commercial, for a commercial purpose.
Okay, thank you. Jim Hilliard?
I look at it as a chicken and egg situation. It may be adaptable for residential. The question is it adaptable for residential considering the present circumstances of what's there? Would a residential facility or facilities be attractive at all, having to deal with the go-karts, having to deal with across the street from a major food store? So I'm not sure it may be adaptable for residential because it's zoned such, but we may have basically rezoned in some respect, or by use, taken it right off of the table. So I'm not as inclined to think that. I think in some respects there is an issue here with not necessarily the topography, but I think the soil conditions, as it's been cited earlier. I'm not. My sense is what's more suitable, and I don't think residential is more suitable at this moment. Thank you.
Well, maybe not single family. I was thinking more like a 40B or, low income, like what they just did down in 28 in Yarmouth there. They did a really nice job down there for affordable housing. I agree with I don't think... I think the issue there is 40B is a four-letter word to a lot of people. I mean, we know that in every town that you talk about it. If someone came before us with the 40B, realizing that our authority is very limited under the statute, I think the abutters who live in the condominium complex
would be out in more than full force, more so than they have been with this. It may be suitable. The question is acceptable. That's my view of it.
Well, I don't disagree, but the abutters, as you know, on a 40B, they're not going to really have any ability to turn it over unless it affects the health or safety or welfare.
I agree.
So,
I agree.
Thank you. Al, what do you think?
Well, as I look at the property, it's remained, as I understand the conversation, in this condition for over 60 years. I don't know what the Hall family intended over the 60 years to do with this property, but it has certainly languishing out there. It needs a purpose. I think the town, this entertainment, I'm looking at it sort of in the current conditions that we're in right now. It'll bring tax dollars to the town. Its hours of operation are really very limited. It's closing at 10 o'clock at night. The property would fit in that area, down a short distance down the road. We have trampoline, we have bumper boats. Across 28, there's also a property which is commercial, almost directly opposite of it. For me, I think this would be suitable for the proposal that is being offered. And I do think the floodplain plays into this.
Okay, Jamie?
I agree with Al. I've lived in this town most of my life, and that area has been a sand pit with various storage for a very long time. I'm sensitive to the need of the condominium next door. However, the buffer is going to stay, and they're going to add to it. I think that it's an appropriate and light use for that land, with all things considered. I think it would fit in well.
Okay. So I guess we need a motion, but I would only support a motion with those conditions that are read off, which if you want, I'll make the motion. I don't care.
Please do.
Can I ask a question before you start the motion?
Who is that?
David, Brian Sullivan.
I'm sorry, would you say Brian?
I'd like to ask a question of Attorney Singer. On the residential property, given you're looking for a variance because of soil conditions, topography, et cetera, has the owners in the past ever done any perk tests on the property to show any reason why it would not perk for residential use?
This is Andrew Singer responding. I am not aware of that either way, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll make a motion then in case 2020-03 that the board grant a variance to redevelop a previously disturbed and commercially used portion of property located in 2 zoning districts in connection with the seasonal miniature golf course. The application is Code of the Town of Harwich, Section 325-52. In Table 1 Use Regulations is set forth in MGL Chapter 40A, Section 10. The property is located at 346 Route 28 and 0 Sisson Road, Map 21, parcels N2-0 and N1-0 in the CH1 and RM zoning districts. The motion is conditioned on the following. 1, that no curb cut, access, or egress will be permitted from or to the property and Harold Street. 2, that the applicant will fully comply with the lighting requirements of Article XX1, Roman 21 of the Harwich bylaw. 3, all water areas on the golf course will be aerated, otherwise treated during the summer months to maintain sanitary and visually acceptable conditions and to prevent algae growth. 4, that there be no demolition or construction or major landscaping in any year during the period from June 30th to Labor Day. 5, that there will be no food and or drink sales on the premises. 6, there will be no music on the premises. 7, the operation of the mini golf course will only be allowed from May to September between the hours of 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. and during the months of May and September for those hours only on the weekends. 8, that all existing trees in the RM zone remain. 9, that if any plants, trees, or shrubs die within the first 3 years of the opening of the golf course, they will be promptly replaced in accordance with the landscape plan that's submitted, and compliance with the landscape plan will be condition 10. In condition 11, the trees on the boundary line on the north and east be a minimum height of 12 feet and 25 in number. That would be the white pines and the red cedars. And that's my motion. Does anyone want to second it?
I second it, Jim Hilliard.
Okay, so Mr. Hilliard, discussion by the board on the motion. Anyone have anything further to say? I guess I was prepared to vote against it, but I have to say, I think Mr. Hilliard makes a very good point. Because of the nature of what's happened here, really, I guess maybe other than some kind of low-income housing, nobody's going to put single-family homes in that RM zoning district as it is now. There's commercial all around it. I just don't see that happening. And maybe
I disagree,
maybe,
Dave. One,
okay.
It's not commercial all around it. It's residential up behind it. 2, I see no impediment to somebody like the Davenport companies putting an infill housing development in there. I think it might be attractive to a developer of a small, not high-end residential development once it becomes known that it's available, if it were to become known that it's available. And most of all, I can't see the justification. I can't see the hardship for a variance.
Well,
nothing has been presented to us to show that that residentially zoned area cannot be developed residentially.
I haven't spoken yet, but I agree with Ms. Muller, and I would basically adopt wholesale the arguments put forth by Attorney Reed. I think he spoke very well. I think the people that bought their homes in a residential area, which they saw was abutted by a residential area, have the right to protection. And that's, I think, the job of this board. They haven't proven a hardship.
Okay, well, got the motion, and I'm going to call.
I do have a question about the conditions of the proposal. No food or drink sales. Would that preclude vending machines with sodas and snacks?
Well, my condition just said no food and or drink, which would preclude vending machines also, I think. Are you in favor of vending machines or opposed to them?
If I were going to support the golf course, the mini golf course, I would certainly expect, as you would probably, taking grandchildren to a place like that, you get a Coke, you get a bottle of water, you get a bag of chips from a machine.
Well, but then you also are liable to get trash.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea, but I'm not sure now. We went to the go-karts last year. I don't think there's vending machines there, but I couldn't swear to it. I don't remember seeing any.
Well, are you precluding the fact that the go-kart area could not also sell food and drinks?
Well, we can't tell them what to do. I mean, if they're doing it, they're doing it. That's a separate piece of property. So.
That's not before us tonight.
No, it's not before us. Okay, I'm going to call the roll. Ms. Muller. Yes or no on the motion?
I vote no.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Okay, I was afraid of that. It's going to come down to me. I'm afraid I'm going to vote no because I find Attorney Reed's arguments more persuasive. I'm sorry, Attorney Singer, I just don't see the hardship.
Mr. Ryer, if that's the case, would you, instead of going forward with your vote, would you allow us to withdraw without prejudice instead?
Well, we've already taken the vote, so I think it's too late.
Well, the vote you've been discussing a vote, but it's not been, the meeting has not, you haven't stopped your meeting yet. I think you could, if you had a motion to withdraw that vote and then, withdraw the motion to approve that was denied, and then we could withdraw without prejudice if you're so willing.
It's okay with me. Let's see.
I have no objection.
Ms. Muller?
I have no objection.
I have no objection.
Does anybody of the members object?
No, I have no objection. I think fine idea.
Okay, I will move that we strike my prior motion, and instead I'll move that we permit the applicant in case 20-20-03. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but Shayla, you can just put it into the record that we allow the applicant to withdraw without prejudice. And we'll have the same 5 people voting. Ms. Muller?
Yes.
Well, do we want any discussion on it? I don't think we need discussion. Okay, yes. Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Who's Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay, and I will vote yes. So that motion passes to withdraw the applicant withdraw without prejudice. So.
Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Attorney Singer.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a brief 30-second break?
Sorry, say that again?
We take a brief break, like sure. 30 seconds, couple minutes. Thank you.
Sure. Yep. Okay, we'll stay on the record, so let's not talk. Just keep.
No.
Yeah, they're gonna come back again though. Yeah. Okay.
Shayla? On the motion to withdraw, did we have a second on that?
I don't believe we did.
No.
I got Jim Hilliard. I'll second it.
Yeah, just for the record on the prior case, even though we voted on the motion just procedurally, Al, could you give me a second on the motion to withdraw without prejudice?
Al, your microphone's off.
Got it on mute.
Dave, I'll do it. Jim Hilliard, I'll do it.
Okay, Jim Hilliard is a second. Sorry,
Yeah.
I find it difficult to remember everything here remotely. Sorry.
I don't blame you.
Perfect.
I got a feeling we're going to be doing this for a long time. Okay, do we have everyone back that needs to be back? Kathy, Chris, Brian, Al, Jim, Jamie, Mike, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, Jim, if you could call our next case, please.
Okay, let me just catch up to where I should be here. This is case number 2020-02. Continued from 1/29/20 to 26/30 and 3/25/20. Royal Apartments LLC, through its agent, attorney Benjamin Zender, has applied for a variance to convert the use of the property from a nursing home assisted living use to multifamily dwellings residential use. The application is pursuant to the Code of the Town of Harwich Bylaws, Section 325, Section 52, and Table 1. Use regulations is set forth, Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 10. The property is located at 328 Bank Street, map 41, panel N4, parcel N4, sorry, MRI, bad light here, MRL zoning district. Thank you.
Okay, we will have voting on this case. Wait, Attorney Zender?
Mr. Chairman, I am here.
Okay, we'll have voting on this case, our 5 regular members, me, Ms. Muller, Mr. Hilliard, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Armstrong. These were the 5 members that were on your first presentation back in, when was it, January? Okay, now we've already had extensive comments from you, Attorney Zender, from the applicant, and also from the public. So we're going to ask not to go through everything again, but maybe just a quick summary and any new information you'd like to present us. And the same with the public. The same with the public.
May I proceed, Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Zender, Attorney Zender.
Okay. No, Mr. Ben is fine. Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, first of all, thank you for hearing us tonight. I know this is a long night, and I know these are trying circumstances, so we appreciate your attention and your time in this matter. You may recall the application is for a special permit for a multifamily dwelling use in the MRL district, which is a permitted use by special permit, and it's also an application for a variance from the requirement in the MRL district that a multifamily dwelling be located on a property of at least 10 acres and that it have a maximum density of no more than 8 bedrooms per acre. The plan hasn't changed in terms of what we're presenting, primarily because we are not proposing to make any changes to the building itself, so it's essentially going to remain the same. But we have gone back and submitted a new site plan, which was prepared by Dave McNevich at Coastal Engineering, and Dave is on the line to answer any questions about this. But based upon comments both from this board and also from the planning board, which we've been through to once, we've made changes to the plan in terms of adding additional parking spaces so that we now have 53 parking spaces for 26 units, which is more than 2 per unit, even though I believe the requirement is 1 per unit under the zoning code. To address the concern that this board had, that there wouldn't be sufficient parking on the site and that either tenants or guests of tenants would begin to park elsewhere in the town, in the central part of the town. Additionally, to address the concern of the planning board, I believe it was, we've moved the dumpster away from the building and located it so that it doesn't create any kind of a hazard if something catches fire. By way of additional materials, in addition to that plan that was presented, I have submitted to the board a PDF that I submitted through Shayla, which includes the permitting history of the town that we obtained by going through the records of the Zoning Board of Appeals records. And I'd like to just go through that very briefly because it's going to tie in to my argument under 48 Section 10 for a variance for this project. And this document is essentially a sequential listing of the permits that have been obtained. And the board will note that every one of these permits was obtained by Gregory Winston, who still owns the property next door and across the street. The first permit was what was known as a continuation of a non-conforming use to rent rooms, serve breakfast and sell antiques. That was granted. I'm sorry, that was for the property across the street. The first permit was permit 83-39 in October of 1983. And Mr. Winston sought an extension of a non-conforming use to allow the construction of an apartment on the third floor, as well as a variance for that activity. And in that particular case, the board found that they allowed both the addition of a third floor unit and a second kitchen to be used on the premises, and they voted to grant the variance. On the ground, the building is unique because of its history as a lodging and guest house, meaning the board didn't look to a condition of the soil or the lot shape or the topography of the lot. They found that the building itself, the structure itself, constituted a unique quality that entitled Mr. Winston to get that variance. Next, there was an application in 1984. On October 30th, 1984, it was a permit to extend the non-conforming use to allow the construction and rental of 8 bedrooms, 4 with adjoining living areas. The board voted unanimously to grant that. That appears to be in the nature of a special permit, although it's not clear. In 1985, Mr. Winston came before the board for variance number 85-52 to add 16 new units, 8 with efficiency kitchens. After some discussion by the board, that particular variance was withdrawn by the applicant. In 1998, application 98-80, and I'm just going to get to it real quickly so I can read to you from this. There was an application before this board, which was in the nature of a special permit and a variance application. And it was an application to convert the property, including the property across the street and next door, from a 30-unit inn/retirement facility with 40-seat dining room to an inn, hotel, restaurant, and tavern use with 31 guest rooms, a 40-seat tavern on the first level, a 100-seat restaurant on the second level. And the board, in fact, granted this relief, including a variance for reduction from parking. And in this particular application, the board found, and I'm going to just read from the variance section itself, they found that the building alterations will not be substantially more detrimental because the property will be physically improved, building, parking, lighting, septic, and landscaping. And then they granted the special permit. And then they granted the variance on the grounds that enforcement of the zoning bylaw requiring a single-family use when it has been used for transient guests for 85 years would be a hardship to the owner. They found that the inn building and the land adjoining and across the street from them are all unique for the area, have a special setting in the area, and have limited value for single-family houses. And then they found that the buildings were in need of remodeling will receive it, and the antique shop will be useful with new plumbing and bathroom facilities, and it would enhance the neighborhood. And so essentially they granted the variance all because of the structures themselves, meaning the nature of the structure and the unique quality of the structure in the neighborhood and what it is. And as I argued at the last hearing, which seems like forever ago, because of the increases in the size of the structure by Mr. Winston to create this large multi-unit residential facility with kitchens, because of that, it rendered this building really unusable for any use in the area other than an assisted living facility, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or a multifamily dwelling. Now, to go to the issue of the density of the bedrooms itself for the variance, the density is already there. We're not seeking to increase the number of bedrooms on the on the site. In fact, we're not seeking to increase the number of units. That permit itself was for 30 units. Now we're going back to 26 units. So in fact, the structure itself already has that density involved with it. There's no change in the structure itself is proposed here. There's going to be an improvement in the structure, all of which were factors in the prior grantings of the variances. Now, this board also, as you probably recall, in 2018 granted a variance to Outer Cape Health for the use of dormitory use in a CH district. And in that particular variance, the board found that the hardship to the applicant was based upon the condition of the structure, and that there would be no substantial derogation because of the poor condition of the structure, that itself would be the hardship that would entitle the applicant to get the variance. In that particular one, the board found that as many as, I believe it was, and I have to get to the page here, as many as 180 seasonal residents in the two buildings would be occupying those buildings. And that, in fact, was also a variance to allow an unpermitted use in a district based upon the condition of the building. But I think there's a pretty clear history that the board has been looking at buildings themselves as somehow unique and capable of providing approval for a variance. Now, 48 Section 10, which I'll read you just a part of it, provides, just bear with me for 1 second, because this is what you're operating in. It says, the board can grant the permit where the permit granting authority specifically finds that owing to circumstances relating to the soil condition, shape, or topography of such land or structures, and especially affecting such land or structure. So it doesn't merely speak to shape, soil conditions, or topography of land. It speaks to soil conditions, shape, or topography of structures. And in this particular case, this structure, by reason of its increase in size and its evolution, all the way up to what was permitted as a resort destination, so-called by Mr. Winston, but in any event by the assisted living with the Royal and with Mr. Winston before that, this structure itself does not lend itself to other uses in this area other than multifamily dwelling. Now, this board may be aware that there's a need for housing in the town. And one of the needs for housing in the town is what I would call, and I think was referred to previously by Ms. Muller, as small A affordable housing. This housing that's proposed by Mr. Newman is going to be 26 units of housing, of which there are, and I'll find my notes very quickly, 5 studio apartments, 14 one-bedroom apartments, and 7 two-bedroom apartments. The rent right now that Newman charges for light units right now is $1,300 a month for a studio, $1,500 a month for a one-bedroom, and $1,800 a month for a two-bedroom. We all understand what housing costs are in this area. Those rents are what I would call small A affordable. We submitted to the board pictures of other units in other buildings that Mr. Newman has developed and still owns. He maintains these buildings in his portfolio and he operates these units. These units are exactly the type of housing that is needed in the town of Harwich and in the center of Harwich to provide that needed base of consumers and residents that can utilize the business in that area. I have to say that if we don't obtain relief to do this as small A affordable in the way that it's being proposed, we have 2 options. One is to come back and do a 40B application before this board for a comprehensive permit. If we do a 40B, it's not going to be 26 units of residential house. It's going to be significantly more units because we're not going to be limited by density requirements. We're only going to be limited by septic constraints. And in order to make this profitable for the additional monies that are going to be required to both construct 40B housing and also to be bound by those restrictions of 40B housing, it's going to be a much denser environment. The other opportunity that we have here is to continue to use the property for an assisted living facility, which we have a right to do. The Royal only shut down last June or July, and that would involve either opening it back up for senior housing, which we know economically doesn't work, and that's one of the reasons why the Royal didn't work out and prior owners didn't work out, or it would be to use the building for assisted living facility for people with physical or other disabilities. which is available, but we don't think is the best use in the center of Harwich. So we're hoping that this board can look at this increased parking, that your concerns about people parking outside have been ameliorated, that you can look at your past history of how you grant variances and on what bases you grant variances, and you can find that this particular property in this district with this building is unusual in terms of the size of the building in a district which allows multifamily dwelling, and you can see fit to both grant the special permit or the operation of the multifamily dwelling, and you can grant the variances from the dimensional requirements that are necessary for occupancy and use of the building, and that you can appropriately condition this in such a way that you feel that this use will benefit the town and benefit the tax base and also benefit the property owner. And Dave McNevich is on the line to answer any questions that you might have about this, and I'm thankful for your time. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone in the public want to speak to this? Attorney Reed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good evening again. I represent Greg Winston and David Plunkett, who are the owners of the adjoining property, number 109 Parallel Street. That is their residence, and it is directly adjoining the right side on Parallel as you face this property. As you indicated, we did have a fairly lengthy meeting back in January on this subject, and I will, apropos of your comments, try to really touch a few highlights rather than repeat what we said then, because I trust, even though it's 3 months, that you still are cognizant of the concerns that were raised at that time. The principal problems with this proposal at this site are, as Mr. Zender indicated, that the RML zone requires 10 acres for any multifamily housing. And this site only has 1.89 acres. And the MRL zone caps the density of any multifamily housing at not more than 8 bedrooms per acre. And this site, as proposed, will be the equivalent of 18 bedrooms per acre. So the problem that they have is the size of the lot, not the shape or size or configuration of the building. In addition, as I pointed out to you last time, Section 325-18L of the bylaw, entitled Additional Regulation, indicates that you cannot have in MRL zone any multifamily housing that is within 100 feet of another multifamily housing development of 4 or more units. And as we pointed out, the Country Meadows condominium with 68 units at number 2 Edgewood Drive is only about 700 or 800 feet.
Mr. Chairman.
Hold on a minute, Attorney Reed. Somebody needs to mute themselves there.
Right. We're listening to somebody else's domestic conversation that's coming through more clearly than Attorney Reed's presentation.
Are we all set? Mr. Chairman, I think you're muted at the moment. Can I continue?
Oh, you're okay, Attorney Reed.
Thank you. In addition to the Country Meadow condominiums, which we discussed last time, I also noted after the meeting that at number 718 Main Street in the center is another multifamily housing development of more than 4 units. And that also, just 3 doors down from Town Hall, is about 700 feet away from the center of this property. There's no relief asked for from that provision, from that prohibition. So you couldn't grant it tonight even if you wanted to. But aside from the deficiencies in the size of the lot, they still can't build it at this location because of that prohibition. Mr. Zender cites the litany of past reliefs granted to this property, and there certainly are a number. But granting of relief is not a hardship which prevents future use of the property. Granting of relief permits use of the property. It can't itself be the basis for a variance. Variance must relate to the site or in very few cases to the building itself. But the hardship that prevents them from doing what they want to do is not the configuration of the building. It's the deficiency of the lot. This is not a case where a building has been either overdeveloped or inappropriately developed and now has no useful use, and therefore you look to an unallowed use for a use variance. They're not asking for a use variance. The use is allowed, but it's only allowed if you've got 10 acres and if you can stay under 8 bedrooms per acre, and if you're more than 1,500 feet away from another multifamily use. It's the dimensional deficiencies, not the building, that is the problem for the development they want to go forward with. They cite you to other developments in Plymouth where they perfectly appropriate looking apartments. From what I could tell from looking up that property, those are 2-bedroom apartments of about 1,050 square feet each. And that's not comparable to what's proposed here. Many of these are under 500 square feet per building. And the need for affordable housing is appropriate consideration. But the fact is that if they want to build affordable housing, there is a mechanism for that. And their inability to do it is not the basis for a variance, because there is an ability to do it. There is a mechanism under Chapter 40B, whether they like it, whether they want it, whether you like it or not. There is an available remedy to do exactly what they want to do by law. I'll just wait for the chairman to get back. The desire for affordable housing is not a hardship. There is a remedy for that, and the variance is not it. And so for all the reasons voiced before, for all the concerns voiced before by the neighbors, for the congestion, for the volume of people, the concern repeatedly voiced by myself and by the neighbors that an assisted living facility is not the same thing as a multifamily apartment, a multifamily dwelling facility. The use is not comparable. Just because there's the same number of bedrooms doesn't make the intensity and the volume of the use the same. And we would suggest that this is not an appropriate site. There is no basis for the variance under the criteria of the statute. And we would ask you again to deny this application.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the public that would like to speak on this application?
Arthur Bowden. Is this going to be any time during the meeting to speak, or Mr. Chairman? I'm asking a question. Is this the only time during this meeting will I be able to speak, or will you later?
No, now's the time.
Now's the time. Okay, I'll take the time if you give it to me. Thank you very much. My name is Arthur Bowden. I live at 800 Orleans Road, which is Route 39, Harwich, Massachusetts, and I submit the following comments. It is a known fact that Harwich and all of Cape Cod has an acute shortage of family dwellings and family rental units, both in the affordable and the workforce categories. The need is great and has been well documented for many years. With the conversion of the Royal property to rental units will help in solving our rental shortage problem for all age groups right here in Harwich. And now during the past session, which is the January session before this board, discussion has gone the full breadth of why this application should not be approved to go forward. But let me add my reason why this application should be approved. It's about people. Let me say it again. It's about people. We're talking about everything under the sun except people. And that's my point, the message I want to leave. Where they live and how they live. We are trying to create a village right here in Harwich Center. We need people living here to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Arthur Bowden.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to who would like to speak to this petition?
I would like to speak.
Hey.
Can you hear me okay?
Who is it?
Judith Underwood. Judith Underwood.
Yep, I've got you.
Okay. So first I should say I'm an elected official. I serve on the, sorry?
An address?
Sisson Road, 220 Sisson Road in Harwich Center.
I'm sorry, one more time.
Go ahead.
Here, wait a sec. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I live in Harwich Center in Sisson Road, 220. And I am an elected official. I'm a water commissioner, and I'm also on the Housing Authority, and I'm also a trustee on the Affordable Housing Trust. I think this is a wonderful project. It's a wonderful use of the building. And I think if we think about when the zoning was done for multifamily units, it was at a time when there was a lot more land in Harwich. That's not the situation today. It's already shown that if that becomes senior housing, it's not a sustainable economic project. And I think you should consider this variance in a positive way. And from a water perspective and a groundwater perspective, if you're going to have 26 units, this is a great place in town if you look at our entire water supply. And as far as the size of the units, I think you would have probably 300 young people, I say young, in their 20s, 30s, early 40s, that are all part of the Cape Cod Young Professionals organization that would line up and fill out an application today to get one of those apartments. We have a severe shortage of housing on Cape Cod. This is an excellent use of it. It'll revitalize the Harwich Center, which is what we've all been wishing for a long time and spending a lot of time planning. This is a wonderful project. I hope you will consider that when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else out there who would like to speak to this? Who would like to speak to this petition? No, hearing no one, I will take a motion to close the public hearing. Mr. Donahue, unmute yourself.
We're here. We want to speak.
Okay, where are you?
This is Greg Winston.
Oh, okay. You're on mute.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Am I on mute?
No, only on the screen. I can hear you, Wadley, but you're on mute on the screen. But go ahead. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I would like to let you know, first of all, sir, I think you're doing a wonderful job. You're an incredible chairman. My name is Greg Winston. I was the former owner of the Winstead Retirement Center, which later became the Royal. I'm actually sitting here with a group of neighbors, all with our masks on, and I would like to introduce Ms. Marla Menzies. She lives directly across the street from the Royal, and she would like to address the board. All right, we're ready to go. Are we okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My name is Marla Menzies. I live at 321 Bank Street, diagonally across from the Royal. I bought my house in 1993. That would be 27 years in August. And I intend to stay there till they take me out in a box. I bought my house because it was affordable on my teacher's salary and because I love old houses and wanted a chance to work on this old house. I also chose Harwich because I knew and liked the town itself, having worked many summers at the Witchmere Harbor Club when Eleanor and Frank Thompson were the owners. I loved the small town feel that reminded me of my own hometown in Hingham when it was still a small town, relatively rural with 3 working dairy farms. I've lived here long enough to have seen both the Winstead and the Royal as assisted living and nursing home facilities. and they have both been good neighbors and cared for the property. I do have some concern that there will not be a property manager living at the site, as was noted in January's meeting. And if I could recall correctly, that person was not even going to be on tape. That means there is no one on site to monitor inside or outside issues or to tackle small problems before they become major problems. I feel that 33 bedrooms and 41 parking spaces proposed by the Royal Apartments is far too dense for the site, and without a property manager on site, potentially open to many problems that could be preventable. I do recognize that housing is an issue. I also know and support the housing proposals that are in the works. However, they are better matched with the bedroom per acres requirements. However, the Royal Apartments are not affordable apartments. They're market rate apartments. And I'm not sure that the monthly rent is affordable for a hairstylist or a wait staff person or any of the young people who we want to be able to afford to live here. So I'm not sure exactly who you think these apartments will be for. I'm also very concerned about increased traffic and general busyness for the potentially 41 more cars. That's more cars getting ready for work in the morning, more cars coming home throughout the late afternoon and evening. Also, if these apartments are for young professionals, they will be going out to dinner or for entertainment or having friends in. If these are the 20 to 40-year-olds that I know, they don't come home at 5 o'clock and stay until the next morning. This puts pedestrians at risk, especially our summer visitors who need to cross the long stretch across Parallel Street or from Bank Street to the library, which is wide and can be especially busy in summer. But really, the reason I wanted to speak is the quality of life issue. I love living in the center of Harwich. I love hearing the band playing on Tuesday nights when I'm out late working in my garden. I love hearing the peepers peeping in the wetlands behind the Royal, and I love the smell of low tide as it rolls up the hill with the fog. And I love that I can see so many stars from my backyard. I am very concerned that with 41 parking spaces and a potential for 41 cars, leaking gas, oil, transmission fluid, which all cars do, and with so much more paved area needed for the parking, that the runoff will slowly and surely begin to degrade the wetlands. It doesn't matter what mitigation for 100-year storms is put in place. It will not be enough as the climate changes and storms intensify. Who would have predicted a tornado for Harwich? And yet we lost 3,000 trees. And with the intensity of storms increasing, the opening to the Royal parking lot is like a funnel for rainwater. There is already gullying into the wetlands. If there is a catch basin for all the rain that is funneled down the hill, who keeps it clear of leaves if it clogs during a 100-year storm and starts running over into the wetlands since there's no manager on site? I'm also concerned that with potentially 33 to 41 people getting up between 6 and 8 in the morning, there will be cars starting and left running to warm up over the 5-minute limit before pollution triples for idling cars. So these are my quality of life concerns that a high density proposal prompts me to write about. I can't measure them, I can't quantify them, but they are what makes living in Center Harwich special to me. And I would hate to see them degrade or disappear because we didn't take measures to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
You can
I just took my mask off here so I can talk. My name is Dr. Stan Moody, and I have a home and office at 317 Bank Street. And I started the Neighborhood Watch program, 12 years ago, 11, 12 years ago. And we've had a good response as far as keeping Bank Street the way it is. There are also future projects like the fire station down the street as to who's going to allow what waivers and so forth for that building. So you're setting a precedent here for a street that's well known on the Cape, Bank Street, so lovely street. And the neighbors are quite concerned as to what's going to happen here. So I did a survey tonight. I just sent out a note to all of the Neighborhood Watch to get a feedback on how they're feeling about it after they've heard all these things being talked about being done here. And they were not able to come to an event. You know, they had to do this by this type of meeting. So anyway, I received 15 responses back, and all of them, not one was for a waiver to change the the problem for density. That is the main problem here for parking and so forth. And too much density, you don't have the land. You don't have the land for the parking to approve the proper amount of parking for what he's talking about. It's just not here. So there's a major concern about changing and giving a waiver for this law that we have to keep the density down. And it would be significantly increased with what he wants to do here. Now, he made a decision to buy this property. That's not our fault. He wants to follow through with something to make money with it, which is fine. But you don't do that when the neighbors that are so valuable to Harwich Center and Harwich don't want it. So please keep that in mind as you go through this tonight. And if you vote on it, I hope you'll reject the waiver for this gentleman, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman? David Reed?
I will speak. Greg Winston, and then I'll turn it over to David Reed. I just want to make one point. Mr. Zender went through a number of issues about variances. We had the variance for a second kitchen on the property so that my partner and I myself could live there and run the retirement center. We only had 2 kitchens on the property. We never had any more than that. They're now talking about a kitchen for every unit, on top of the fact that I believe one of my neighbors just mentioned the number of parking spaces. I think they're up to 63 now. We're talking about 1.8 acres of land, and we're talking about a way more density, and we're talking about a kitchen for every unit. I had to go to the Board of Appeals to get a permission to put an apartment on the 3rd floor so that my partner and I could live there and run our business. And it was forever before I finally got that decision. And now they're asking for 27 kitchens? I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else in the public?
Mr. Chairman, David Reed?
Yes, Attorney Reed.
Thank you very much. Ms. Underwood, I believe if I understood her point correctly, suggested that the 10-acre requirement of the bylaw is now obsolete because there's no longer 10 acres of land available for this kind of use. And several others have discussed the need for affordable housing. Those are all excellent public policy discussions and appropriate for a town meeting floor vote to amend the bylaw. But they are not the basis to grant a variance from the clear and unequivocal requirement of the bylaw. Now that's what's before you, not the public policy decision about how the bylaw should be changed in the future, or whether what's there is good or bad anymore or not. Whether this application meets the requirements of Chapter 48, Section 10 for the granting of a variance. And I ask you please not to be diverted in your attention from the finite questions before you by looking at the broader questions that are really for another day and in another forum. This application simply does not meet the requirements of the granting of a variance. The situation with the building is not the problem. The problem is that they're asking for a variance from a 10-acre requirement or from bedroom requirement per acre, and that's a density issue. It's an issue of the property, not of the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we sort of exhausted.
Mr. Chairman?
Who's that?
This is Bev Zender.
Okay, I'd like though to, okay, do you want to respond to the public comments?
I would like to respond. Your bylaw in section 325.52 gives powers to this board that are more comprehensive than 40A, section 10. And it says that this board has the power to grant variances, including the power to grant a variance authorizing a use or activity not otherwise permitted in the district in which the land or structures is located, which means that your own bylaw gives you more power than 40A section 10. I'll go back and remind you that section 10 authorizes you to grant variances if you find conditions affecting structures and not just land. And so we've heard all this. And I'd like to go back one more time to what Mr. Winstanley said. He has people that are telling you that this density is too heavy for this district. This is no increase in the number of bedrooms. It's a decrease in the number of units. And it's certainly less than his proposal to put in 31 guest rooms, a 40-seat tavern, and a 100-seat restaurant in this property. If my client were to come forward and seek to put 140 seats of restaurant use on Bank Street or on Parallel Street, there's no way that we could hope to get that relief these days. So I'm hoping that you're not diverted and you do understand that this board has and it can grant variances based on uniqueness of structures in the town of Harwich, and that's exactly what this is. And thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to entertain a motion to close the public hearing. How about Mr. Donahue, if you could unmute?
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Ms. Muller, do you want a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, public hearing is now closed. Board members, do you have questions for the applicant? Do you want to discuss the case?
I'd like to discuss the case a bit.
Okay.
It's my understanding that I know there's some concerns by neighbors with regard to the potential traffic issues. Harwich itself, Harwich Center, is growing. There's a new restaurant up there now, it's a Seal, which has been relatively popular. The people who would be moving into the old Royal would lend credence to the businesses that are going to be up there. And years ago, and I know there's been issues with regard to traffic, years ago, the library used to be a courthouse on the basement floor. And that intersection with 39 was designed for parking, specifically for the appearances of individuals, plus the police and lawyers for the courthouse. At one point, there used to be a post office in the center of town. It then later moved up into East Harwich, another branch, of course, we all know is in downtown Harwichport. That is a relatively vital area. And if it's going to grow, it's going to need people. And as Mr. Bowden said, this is all about people. We can all agree, I think, that there's a dramatic shortage of housing on the Cape. And regardless of whether there's going to be oil spills from motor vehicles, which I thought was rather interesting, I do feel as though the property has great potential for helping us with our lack of housing. I move the question.
I had a comment.
Yeah, Jamie?
Just briefly, I agree with what Al said. I mean, here we are faced with an empty building. And in my opinion, an empty building of that size in an area that we're trying to revitalize is working against everything. That brings the entire area down. Along with that, obviously, we need the housing. Multiple people have said that. It's clear that we need the housing, and they've addressed the parking that we talked about before, which is also dictated by building code. So for me, it seems a win-win. It's existing. Let's do something with it, and we have a need for it.
I don't disagree on the housing question, but what we have to decide is not that public policy issue, but do they meet the requirements for variance? I don't see that they've met those requirements, just speaking for myself.
Well, if I look at, the requirements.
The issue is really a town meeting issue, I think, as Attorney Reed correctly pointed out, to change the density requirement here. And they can come back with a 40B if they want, and we'll be entitled to put reasonable conditions on it. And then it would be affordable housing, but they're not talking about affordable housing here. They're talking about market rate housing. Kathy Muller?
Yeah, I just want to confirm my recollection of a few things. Some of my numbers are a little different from yours, Mr. Zender. We're talking about 26 units. Is that correct? With 34?
Yes.
Something like 34 bedrooms?
I believe it's 33.
33 bedrooms, okay.
I believe it is, but I'm going to get back to the notes.
No, I think you might be right. I might have overcounted by one. Okay, so the density is, this board is accustomed to seeing proposals that involve variances or special permits where the permitted density is greater than the bylaws permit. Usually we're talking about something like 10 or 15% over what's permitted. This is 2.25 times the permitted density, which is troubling to me. How many parking places? How many parking places? We've heard two or three different numbers tonight.
I can answer that. There are 53. That's 53.
53 parking places.
And if I may, that was increased due to the board's concerns that there may be, people may try to park off site. So it's actually almost twice the requirement under the zoning bylaw.
Okay, so there are going to be at least one person in every bedroom in this building, and oftentimes two. Is that correct?
I can't tell you how many. I can't tell you that.
Well, it looks to me as if we might have as many as 65 people living there. And where will people park when they can't park in the lot there?
Well, the reason that we provided 53 parking spaces is so that we wouldn't have that. We're well in excess of what the zoning bylaw requires. So that's 2 spaces for every unit, including studios and 1-bedrooms. I have young couples
with children living on either side of me. They often have parties. They often have 3, 4, 5 extra cars. Where will the guests park when they're visiting?
I'm sure that there will be sufficient parking on site to handle that, and we hope that people do enjoy these apartments. And so, yes, it is possible that somebody may have some guests over, but there will be other units in which people aren't using all of their parking. And so we think that 53 spaces, again, we've gone well in excess of the zoning code to try to address this concern on the board. We're pushing into the wetland to do that. If this board grants the variance, we're going to have to go back to the Conservation Commission to get that approval, which we think we can get. But we think 53 spaces for 26 units, many of which are studios, is in excess of what would be required anywhere in the town for residential parking.
Okay, and could you repeat for us, please, what the market rates would be for rental for these units?
$1,300 a month for a studio, $1,500 a month for a 1-bedroom, and $1,800 a month for a two-bedroom. And at those rates, that building will have many, many, many takers at those rates.
I'm sure that's true. I actually am a volunteer with an organization in town where I meet many people who are in need of affordable housing. And I would think that some of them in the two-bedroom unit would certainly be putting 4 people in there, if not 6 people. I'm concerned about absentee management and no control over the number of people who might be living in a room. I'm not opposed to multifamily housing on this site. I just question whether the density is obviously far beyond what's legal, and I question whether it's going to be managed properly.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim Hilliard?
He gave up his bed.
Jim, are you still there?
I am. Is there a question for me?
Yes. You want to comment on this case?
This is Ben Zender. I have commented. I don't understand the question, Mr. Chairman.
Where Gene is.
We're just discussing whether or not we think the case 2020-02 qualifies for a variance or not.
We're looking for Mr. Hilliard.
Yeah, Mr. Hilliard.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'll get off.
That's okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's skip him for a minute. Mr. Murphy, any comments, questions?
Yeah, I have, we talk about the hardship and as far as the requirements for variance, obviously there's an existing building there that really doesn't have a lot of other use. It could be envisioned. I mean, if we were coming here with a fresh open field, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Obviously, you wouldn't build this unit there. But since it was an existing building that is historical, so no one's going to want to rip it down. There's plenty of dilapidated buildings of historic nature in town. It's nice to have one put to good commercial use and probably be well maintained. So I think as far as many of the requirements, certainly the existing building matches one. The hardship being that this is unlikely to be easily used, if at all used, for a use that would be allowed under the regulations. And as far as helping and any harm to the public good, obviously a higher density, as others pointed out, Al and others, Jamie, that this would be good for the restaurants in the area and clearly good for housing that's needed in town. I think it satisfies many of the conditions that we need for a variance. And it already is being used now for high density housing.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman? It's Jim Hilliard.
Okay, Jim.
I'm sorry, I somehow got knocked off, but I'm back.
Okay, good. We're just, as the board is discussing whether or not we think case 2020-02, the Bank Street Royal case, meets the requirements of a variance. And it sounds like among the voting members, Mr. Donahue and Mr. Armstrong are sort of leaning that it does. Ms. Muller and I are sort of leaning the other way. Mr. Murphy thinks it meets requirements for a variance. So you're going to be voting. Why don't you give us your thoughts?
Sure. I apologize for somehow losing contact, but I look at the requirement of 10 acres for the size of these units. I don't think the relationship between 10 acres and the number of units that are going to be put here it makes any common sense, in the sense of how much space would there be unless they were going to build a building that was going to cover 30% or 40% of the 10 acres, which they're not. Number one. Number two, I do believe that when developers are faced with financial issues, they have to take and do what is best for them financially. I believe that this will either end up as a 40B, or it could very well end up just sitting there over time and falling apart. I don't think either one of those is something that the neighborhood is going to be happy with. We have no control over a 40B. They could put 3 times the number of beds on that 1.5 acres as they're putting in now. I do believe they have met the burden given where this came from years ago when it was built, developed, and how it's been used. And I do believe they meet the legal requirements of the bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, Mike Capoli.
Yeah, I would like to say that Attorney Zender made a great presentation. I think he addressed a lot of the major issues that that the board was concerned with last meeting. But I am concerned about the density.
Okay, fair enough. Brian Sullivan.
Thank you. One question I have for the party is, when did Mr. Noonan of Royal Apartments purchase this site, these properties from the Winsteads?
What? Where did they purchase?
How long is the current owner? When did he buy the property from the past owner from the Winstead?
It's a question for Attorney Zender.
Yes.
Can the board hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It was recently. It was I believe it was last year. And I had one more thing just to address that I didn't tell the board earlier. If it makes any difference, this building has an elevator and it serves every unit as a handicapped unit, which lends it to that particular use, meaning it already has an elevator. We plan on keeping that elevator and keeping that access. And my client has asked me to tell you this, that every unit will have marble countertops and stainless steel appliances in it. If that is of interest to you, I hope that it has some weight for you as well. Thank you.
Where it was purchased last year, did they purchase it as an active nursing and assisted living center, and then they terminated the operation, or was it already empty?
No, the prior owner actually terminated operations, pulled up stakes, and the building was empty, and then my client purchased it.
And your client did not purchase it for the purpose of running a nursing home or assisted living, correct?
No, he did not. And as a part of this due diligence, we did go through a staff review process to examine whether or not we could obtain the permitting for this. And we were informed by the building inspector that we would have to come before this board for the permitting. But it was purchased as a vacant building with the intention of developing it for some form of residential housing.
Can I ask why they didn't consider purchasing it with the understanding that they had to gain, before completing the transaction, they had to gain a variance for the property?
Well, the reason was they understood when they purchased this property that if they didn't obtain a variance from this board, that they could go through the 40B process, which they still can do. So the building is usable in that way, but it's not something that our clients really want to do, and we don't want to, that density probably, would be more difficult for the town to manage in that area. So we have the ability to do that, but we think a better option is to do what we're proposing now.
Mr. Zender, I'm curious that you've mentioned several times the prospect of a 40B development being there and many more people. How small would you anticipate that 40B units would be in order for there to be more of them on that property? Because mostly, as Attorney Reed pointed out, and as your floor plan shows, the majority of these units are under 550 square feet or under.
The units would meet all state requirements for housing, first of all, minimum habitability requirements, but also a 40B would involve removing the daycare center building and putting another building on the lot to house those additional units.
Thank you.
Have there been any attempts, Attorney Zender, to have any other kind of development on this property?
No, the owner of this property is involved in the business of owning and operating workforce rental apartments, and this building appealed to him because that is in fact what the building lends itself to. So, and we, to go back to the hearing that you had before this, where the board found that there might be other uses of the property. We don't really believe that there's an economically viable use of this building that doesn't involve either market rate residential apartments, a 40B, or some other type of residential use. We just don't see the building as being usable and for any other use. And I think that's one of the factors the board looked at in the last hearing, and I hope you look at this one as well.
Okay, when we discussed this back, when was it, in January, I had proposed a number of conditions if there was going to be a motion to support the application. And I'm just going to read them over. Number one, the applicant must meet all of the lighting requirements of Article Roman 21 of the Harwich zoning bylaw, and must amend submitted plan SP-2 to show compliance therewith. 2, the applicant must include a restriction in each lease and or any deed for the property or any part thereof that A, prohibits parking by the tenant or purchaser, as the case might be, or any of their guests on either Bank or Pleasant Streets or in the town library parking lots, except during such times as they are patronized in the library, and that this restriction will be enforced by the applicant at its expense upon written request by the town, or by the town at the applicant's expense, or at the expense of the tenant or the owner of the applicable unit, as the case may be at the town's election. 3, no demolition, exterior construction, or new landscaping or site work between June 30 and Labor Day of any year. 4, compliance with the Conservation Commission items noted in the attached memo, which are made for the conditions of the special permit, because they need that plus the variance. And 5, leases to be a minimum of 1 year, and each lease should prohibit subletting. We don't want Airbnbs if this is approved. So those would be the conditions that I would require to get me to vote in favor of it, which I still haven't decided on yet. Attorney Zender, how about the point raised by Attorney Reed on the need to comply with, where is it here, 325-18L, which you have not asked for relief for, as he pointed out.
Yes, and the reason we didn't ask for that was because we went through the town-ordained process of obtaining from the building inspector a determination of what relief was required, and he did not include that relief. I would ask the board to grant that relief. If the board feels that we need to request an amendment of the application for you to consider that, we're happy to do that. But I do take Mr. Reed's point, and I would ask the board to grant that relief and would ask us to allow us to amend if, in fact, the board sees fit to grant the variance. If the board isn't going to be granting the variances, I'm not sure I want to go through that exercise.
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
If the board is willing to grant, if the sufficient number of members, meaning 4, is willing to grant the variance request that we have on the table in front of you, we would ask the board to allow us to amend the application to include a request for that relief as well, for the 1,500-foot setback requirement, distance requirement.
Okay, so are you asking for a straw poll of the board before we actually put a motion up?
I was going to try to insert myself at the appropriate time, Mr. Ryer. Thank you for asking me. Yes, I would ask for a roll call straw poll so I can get notes down on this.
Okay, board members that are voting here, let's assume that there was a motion to grant the variance and the special permit to allow the application to proceed as requested. Ms. Muller, how would you vote?
With the current density, I would have to vote no.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard.
I'd vote yes.
Mr. Donahue.
I vote yes.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
I vote yes.
Okay, and I would also vote no. I just don't think you've met the requirement for the hardship.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask the board to consider a motion to withdraw the matter without prejudice.
I think they should deny it.
Okay, somebody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Donahue, I'll vote yes. Ms. Muller?
Yes.
Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay, motion to withdraw without prejudice granted.
Thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the whole thing is voted out? Whatever. It's exactly the same thing that happened with the last one. Yep. It makes no sense because they're asking for more zoning relief. They have to have 3 variances and they can prove no hardship. The guy bought the building knowing he couldn't do what he wanted to do with it. So I'm like, yeah.
Okay, let's call
Can you address Mr. Winston and let him know we're hearing their conversation?
I just said that there is no hardship. I can see no hardship, but I agreed that they deserve to go ahead and withdraw. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next case, as we still have 3 cases. We'll go a little quicker.
Case number 2020-11, continued from March 25th. James Pettit Jr. has applied for a special permit for relief from the minimum lot size requirement to convert an existing breezeway and garage into a 1-bedroom apartment. The application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325, table 1, use regulations as set forth in Mass General Laws, chapter 48, section 6. Property is located at 2 Bay Pine Road, map 113, parcel 218 in the RR zoning district. And Mr. Chairman, I did not sit on that case, so I don't believe I'm eligible to vote.
Well, there's actually been no testimony taken on it, so.
Okay, all right.
In fact, voting will have Ms. Muller, Mr. Hilliard, Mr. Donahue, Mr. Armstrong, and Mr. Murphy. I will not vote, nor will Mr. Capoli or Mr. Sullivan. So, do we have the applicant on behalf of the applicant?
Jay Pettit.
Okay, Mr. Pettit, yes.
Thank you. Should I continue to begin?
Okay, present your case, please.
My name is Jay Pettit. I'm the owner and the applicant at 2 Bay Pine Road in Harwich. I would like to simply make an apartment for my son. I think this is one of those situations where a lot of things came together at the same time. My son decided not to go to college, but to start a business here in Harwich. My building's been in disrepair for many years now, and I needed to make some repairs due to rot and insect damage, and it seems like I could support him by, rather than supporting him with his college education, to support him with his current endeavor by providing him with affordable housing, or providing him a place to live and continue. The construction is all to be within an existing footprint. It's really just a change of usage from a winterized breezeway and just taking the garage and making that part of the same space. There wouldn't be any changes to the exterior part of the structure in terms of its form, and it would all remain within the same footprint. It's really just changing the usage. In order to stay, or I'm in compliance with all setbacks, site coverage, the building coverage, and in order to stay in compliance with the number of bedrooms, it would have to stay, currently I have a 3-bedroom septic. I would deconstruct one of the bedrooms in the current 3-bedroom configuration in order to make that have 2, and then have this one be a 1-bedroom apartment. And the only relief I would ask for is I have 93% of the lot, the lot area in order to have approval, and I'm asking you for relief from that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, questions from the board. Ms. Muller. Kathy, you're on mute.
I have no questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard.
I have no questions.
Mr. Donahue.
Had this property been before us before?
No, not since I bought it in 2002.
Okay. No, I have no further questions.
Mr. Armstrong.
No questions.
Mr. Murphy.
No questions.
Mr. Capoli.
No questions.
Mr. Sullivan.
The only question I have is, and I apologize not finding it, I guess there's a letter from Board of Health regarding, or somebody regarding configuration of changing the bedroom door, and something to do about the breezeway. I apologize, I'm not pulling it up. And I didn't know if that has to be discussed tonight as part of the review of the applicant.
Okay, I don't have any questions. I do think it meets the requirements of the bylaw and the Gale case for a special permit. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak to this application? Hearing no one, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Okay, we'll have the motion from Ms. Muller, seconded by Mr. Donahue. I'll take a motion in the case itself, please.
I'll make the motion, Jim Hilliard. I move that we approve the application of James Pettit Jr. for special permit for relief from the minimum lot size requirement to convert an existing breezeway and garage into a 1-bedroom apartment. Application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325, table 1. Use regulations is set forth in Mass General Laws, chapter 48, section 6. Property located at 2 Bay Pine Road.
Okay, map 113, parcel T1-8 in the RR zoning district. Can I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
Mr. Chairman, there's a, from the zoning, from the health board, there's some conditions that are applied to this property. One of the several items that need to be addressed before it can be approved for a permit. First of all, passing a Title V inspection needed to be submitted to the health department. Two compartment septic tank and 2 septic tanks in series needed to be installed. And 3, a door needed to be eliminated from the deconstructed bedroom. So there is only 1 entrance into the enlarged bedroom. It says all this criteria must first be met before the health department can approve the building permit.
Right, so even though we approve a special permit tonight, the applicant still has to go with his building plans to the health department and get them to approve them before he will be issued a building permit. So we really don't need to do anything in our decision with respect to the health department items. So any discussion? Well, did we? Yeah, we have a motion. We have a second, right?
Yes.
Okay. Discussion by the board on the motion? No discussion. I'll call for the vote. Ms. Muller? The motion?
In favor?
Yes. Okay. Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Okay. Motion's approved. The special permit is granted. And Kayla, I authorize you to stamp all of the plans, please.
Good luck with the apartment and best of luck to your son.
Thank you very much.
A nice thing you're doing, Mr. Pettit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Hold the next case, please, Jim.
Case number 2020-12, continued from March 25th. Joseph G. Blute, Jane R. Blute, through their agent, Chris Dietrich of Shoreline Pools, have applied for a variance to site coverage requirement in order to accommodate a stone paver patio and open-air pavilion. The application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325, table 2. Area regulations are set forth in Mass General Laws, chapter 48, section 10. Property is located at 33 Oliver Snow Road, map 24, parcel E2-2 in the RR zoning district.
Okay, we will have voting on this case. Ms. Muller, Mr. Hilliard, Mr. Donahue, Mr. Armstrong, and Mr. Capoli.
Mr. Chairman, Attorney William Kroll speaking.
Attorney Kroll, good evening.
Good evening. Nice to see everybody again.
Yeah.
The agent listed in the petition is Chris Dietrich, who you can see on the screen. It says Jillian Dietrich. He has asked me to assist with the presentation, if I may go forward.
Yes, sir.
If I might interrupt, Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite in a butter, but I live a few houses down at 11 Oliver Snow Road, and I don't see why it would affect me voting, but I just want to let that be known.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Capoli. So I represent Joseph and Jane Blute regarding the property at 33 Oliver Snow Road. And I have with me tonight Chris Dietrich, who owns Shoreline Pools. We really need your help tonight. And I'm hoping that we can turn the herd on variances this evening as well. So what we have is a situation where it's pure and simple a site coverage issue. We need a variance from site coverage. The site coverage maximum is 25%, and the pool and the patio and the cabana total 30.1%. Now here's the problem. As far as background, Mr. Dietrich has been putting in pools and operating a business in Harwich for 32 years, and in surrounding towns been installing pools. He obtained a building permit from our building commissioner, Mr. Chesley, based upon the plan that he submitted, that you have in your packet. And he in fact installed the pool. He got the permit for the cabana, the patio, and the pool, and he installed the pool and part of the cabana. I'm sorry, part of the patio. They said he's been installing pools in Harwich for 32 years, and site coverage has never, in his experience, been an issue with installing a pool. When he went to install the cabana, Pinewood Products asked for a building permit, applied for a building permit, and that's when Mr. Chesley denied the building permit for the cabana with the pool already in the ground and the patio half built, denied the building permit and said, you exceed site coverage. You need to go to the Board of Appeals for a variance. Now, Mr. Dietrich and the owners are $65,000 into this project at this point. So as I said, we really need your help tonight. The owner, one of the owners, Mr. Blue, is in his 70s, and he has severe muscular issues in his legs, and he needs physical therapy on a regular basis, and the entire pool is at walking height depth. There's no deep end of the pool. It's all so he can walk in this pool for his physical therapy. He has great difficulty in walking. He may need a wheelchair shortly, and he needs the patio, as you see on the plan, to be able to negotiate around with his walking disability and future need for a wheelchair. There are no trees in the backyard where the pool is located. So he needs an open air pavilion for shade for both himself and his caregivers. He relocated the septic system to where it is sited now at his own expense so that he could put the pool in. This was all part of the plan that was submitted to the town. When you look at the back end of the house on the property, there's a deck, and then there's a stone retaining wall in between the deck and the pool. That's because there's a serious drop off in topography that necessitates the retaining wall, and it prevented the pool from being attached to the deck. Otherwise, they would have built the pool right off the deck, and you would not have needed the northwest section of the patio that says proposed pool patio. It would have been right up close to the deck in an otherwise flat backyard. But because of this serious drop off in topography, they had to site the pool where they did. If they had known, if the installer and the owner had known that site coverage was an issue, which it never had been in 32 years previous, then they would have designed the pool, the patio, and the cabana entirely differently so as to meet site coverage requirements. So they need a variance tonight. I would submit that there is a unique topography to this lot because of the drop off in the level of the backyard where the retaining wall exists, which necessitates pushing the pool out into the backyard and having to have a larger patio. There are no trees in the backyard, soil conditions, topography, there's no trees at all, so they need the cabana, the open air cabana. The result is the owner has a hardship. Mr. Dietrich definitely has a hardship. He's got $65,000 worth of money into this project, and he has a very small business installing and maintaining pools, and under the governor's present restriction, he can't open any of the pools. They're not allowed to until after May 18th, if then. So his business is suffering greatly, and he does not need this on top of everything. I think the board can grant relief, and I think this is a prime situation where the board should grant relief and look at the equities and the fairness of the whole situation. I might say parenthetically, I don't want to be putting words into Mr. Chesley's mouth, but he has implied that the the board, he would have no problem, let's say, with the board granting a variance in this situation to afford the remedy that's needed to legitimize what he found to be an issue halfway through the project. So I think the board can grant relief without substantial detriment to the public good. It's a private pool behind a single-family residence. There would be no substantial derogation from the intent or purpose of the bylaw. It would be a 5.1% variance over the site coverage requirement of 20% to get to 30.1% as shown on the plan. Mr. Dietrich has already been waiting, and the owner's already been waiting 2 months to get to this hearing because of the COVID crisis. They need to get this pool finished and get it operational, and we respectfully request that you grant the variance this evening. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to vote on the case, but I do look at the site plan, or am looking at it, and between the edge of the deck that's on, I guess it's the eastern side, it's 22 feet elevation, and when you go down to the start of the patio, it's about 18 feet. So there's a pretty substantial drop off. And I think Attorney Crowell makes a good point that the topography is an issue here on the siting of this pool away from the deck. Now, I also think had they come to us without the pool in the ground, we probably would not have approved this, but I think there is that topographical argument, and there's certainly a hardship, a financial hardship here if Mr. Dietrich and the owner have to take it out and start from square one. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the voting members. Ms. Muller?
I think this is a very modest accommodation that's being asked for. I have no further questions.
Mr. Hilliard?
I have no questions.
Mr. Donahue?
No questions.
Mr. Murphy?
No questions.
Okay, I'm sorry, I skipped Mr. Armstrong.
Just a procedural question, Attorney Crowell. It was triggered when they applied for the cabana. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that a building, or what exactly is that?
It's a structure with a roof on it to provide shade, but it's an open air pavilion. But it's a combination of materials under the bylaw designed to provide support for the roof. So it's a structure under the bylaw. So you have to have a building permit.
I see. But it just a thought, if they eliminated the cabana, though, this wouldn't be an issue, would it?
Yes, it would. Because they'd have to eliminate approximately 1,100 square feet to get to 25%.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Foley?
No questions.
Mr. Sullivan?
No questions. Haven't been by the site. It's a reasonable request.
Okay. Is there anyone out in the public that wants to speak to this application? Hearing no one, I'll move to or accept a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Who moved?
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Donahue, second.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, wait. Are you voting? You're not voting. Somebody else. How about Mr. Capoli?
Yes.
Second. Okay, second for Mr. Capoli. Any discussion by the board? I'll entertain a motion in the case.
I move, excuse me, Jim Hilliard. I move that the board approve the variance as requested by Joseph G. Blute, Jane R. Blute, through their agent, William Kroll. Variance to the site coverage requirement in order to accommodate a stone paver patio and open air pavilion. Application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325, table 2, area regulations as set forth in Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 10. Property is located at 33 Oliver Snow Road, map 24, parcel E2-2 in the RR zoning district.
Okay, can I have a second, please, from one of the voting members?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Donahue, second. Any discussion by the board? Okay, I'll call for a roll call vote. Ms. Muller?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
And Mr. Capoli?
Yes.
Okay, motion approved, special permit granted, Attorney Crowell.
Thank you very much, Board. I appreciate it. And Mr. Dietrich and the owner do as well.
Thanks,
Okay,
Bill.
yes, you're welcome.
You're welcome.
I also think since you constructed it subject, or not subject to, but with a building permit, that cuts a lot of equity in your favor. You just didn't do it willy-nilly. You had a permit for the original construction. Okay, could we call the next and hopefully last case, Mr. Hilliard?
Case number 2020-13 continued from March 25th, 2020. Heather Schwartz and Jeffrey Schwartz, through their agent, attorney William Crowell, have applied for a special permit to demolish an existing deck and build a screened porch onto a pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling. The application is pursuant to the code of the town of Harwich, section 325, table 2. Area regulations as set forth in Mass General Laws, chapter 48, section 6. The property is located at 12 Satucket Road, map 14, parcel Q7 in the RH-1 zoning district.
Okay, we'll have voting on this case. Attorney Crowell, Ms. Muller, Mr. Hilliard, Donahue, Mr. Armstrong, and Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Attorney William Cole from Howard Court, representing the petitioners, Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz. I was in front of this board a couple of years ago for a renovation to the covered porch and on the front of the house, and to create some dormers. And we got permission at that time to demolish the deck in the rear of the property, but that was never done. So the pre-existing non-conforming deck remains. I won't belabor this case tonight because I know you've had a long night, as we all have. But the property's on Satucket Road in Harwich Port, and we have a pre-existing non-conforming deck that on the northeast side is 18.7 feet from the northerly lot line, where the code requires, or the bylaw requires 20 feet. So it's a gale case situation where we are seeking to intensify the existing nonconformity and remove the eastern part of the deck, remove the deck entirely, and then build a 14 by 15 foot screen porch shown as a shaded area on your plot plan. And it's also shown very nicely on the building plans by Encore Construction. And Dale Nicola from Encore Construction may be listening in on this petition at this point. I believe he is.
Yeah, Bill.
Hi, Dale. We have a denial letter from Mr. Chesley saying that we need a special permit from this board. And I would argue that that the board could grant a special permit due to the fact that the screened-in porch would not constitute a substantial increase in noise, fumes, odors, congestion, traffic, or the like, and would not result in a substantial detriment to the entire neighborhood. And in anticipation of, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, to the Ryer rule of not building in the summer, I want to make the point that I've discussed with Mr. Nicola that all of the contractors are hurting right now. and they need to get out there and they need to get to work, and this is not a big project. And I would ask that the board not impose that restriction so that they can get going and get this up during the summer months as soon as possible. Thank you.
Is the proposed patio going right to the lot line?
No. I believe the proposed patio, and Mr. Nicola can correct me if I'm wrong, is going in place of the existing deck.
Yeah, so I'm actually not involved in the construction of the patio. So at this point in time, we're just asking for relief and approval on the screen deck, on the screen porch.
The patio, Mr. Chairman, is ground level. It can go right to the lot line.
Oh, I understand that. He can do that. I just was curious. Okay, questions from the board. Ms. Muller.
I have no questions.
Mr. Hilliard.
No questions.
Donahue.
I have no questions.
Mr. Armstrong.
No questions.
Mr. Sullivan.
No questions.
Mr. Murphy.
No questions.
Mr. Capoli.
No questions.
Anyone out there in the public want to comment on this case?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dale Nickett with Encore Construction. To Bill's point about being able to get the project started as soon as possible and probably be building into July. I also talked to the owners, and they also requested that if the special permit is granted, that again that rider not be put on it so that they can get this done and have the opportunity to enjoy it when they're actually going to be able to come down in September or October. Thank you.
We're not talking big cement trucks or anything like that, or something like that.
Is there room to get all of the construction vehicles on site so they're not out on the road?
There is. Yeah, it's actually a pretty small project, so we're not going to have a lot of vehicles involved.
Okay, I would propose to whoever makes the motion, because it is kind of tight down there, that we just put a condition that they put all of the construction vehicles on site. It's not a big project, so they should not need a lot of contractors out there, I guess. Is there anybody in the public that wants to speak to this motion? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing, please.
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Ms. Muller, second. Second by Mr. Sullivan. Any discussion by the board? Okay, I'll entertain a motion in the case itself.
Did you take a vote?
Jim Hilliard.
No, we forgot. Okay. All in favor of closing the public hearing? Thank you, Mr. Okay.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, everybody. Anybody opposed? No, public hearing is closed. Thank you, Attorney Crowell. It's getting late here.
Understood.
Motion in the case.
Jim Hilliard, I make the motion to approve the special permit requested by Heather Schwartz, Jeffrey Schwartz, to their agent, Attorney William Kroll, for a special permit to demolish an existing deck and build a screened porch onto the pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling. The application is pursuant to the Code of the Town of Harwich, Section 325, Table 2, area regulations as set forth in Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 6. The property is located at 12 Setauket Road, Map 14, Parcel Q7, in the RH-1 zoning district. The condition would be that during construction, that the commercial vehicles will be parked on the site.
I have a second, please.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Sullivan, second. Discussion by the board. Any discussion? I mean, I think it clearly meets the bylaw and the Gale case requirements. So we'll call a vote. Ms. Muller?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
And Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Okay, Okay, motion passed, special permit granted.
Thank you, folks. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowell. Okay, Shayla, I authorize you in case 2020-12 and this 2020-13 to stamp in all of the documents, the plans, the site plans, or whatever. Any other business? Okay, I think we're done for the evening. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it went so late, but those two long cases, as you saw, the last three went by very quickly. So thanks everybody for hanging in. I don't know how long this is going to continue, but I think it's going to be a good long time. I'm not too anxious to get in a room with, 20 abutters and all of us. I don't think, no matter what the state decides, the virus, until we get a vaccine, is going to be out there. So stay well. Thanks much.
And well done.
I will take a motion.
You did a great job, David.
Yeah.
There was one more thing we were going to address.
Well, I said I wasn't going to, but why don't you address it?
This will be my last meeting as a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm coming up on 6 years. My term expires on June 30th, and I think April 30th is a fitting date for me to do this. Unlike many people in town, I am able to be out masked and gloved among other people, so I'm spending several days a week, several mornings a week at the family pantry, and I've also anticipated extending my activities as a poll worker, which I think is terribly important this year. And so that's where I'm going to put my time.
Not a pole dancer.
Not a pole dancer. See me 40 years ago.
No, thank you very much for your loyal service, Kath. I mean, you miss very few meetings. You always have great questions. Going to miss you.
Well, I thank you, Dave, but others will step into the breach.
Well, we have 3 people. I'm going to recommend Mr. Capoli, if you're still there. I'm going to recommend you to the selectmen. You've been a member for quite a while now. What they do with it, I don't know. They don't necessarily do what I ask them, but I will make a recommendation for you, Mike, to become a regular member.
Thanks, Dave.
With that, I will.
Kathy, thank you.
You're welcome, Al.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks to all of you.
Smiling face.
Okay, I don't know
Kathy?
who seconded it, but
Kathy, I'm going to miss you next to me in those meetings when we all get back
No, I'm
together.
going to miss you, Jim. Thank you. But we wouldn't be next to each other anymore for the foreseeable future.
That's correct.
You can always tie in remotely now that you know how to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Motion to adjourn, all in favor?
I didn't get a motion. Who was the mover? Who moved?
Here, I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I move that we adjourn. Mr. Murphy, second.
Second.
Hand up. Yes, all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.